And welcome back, fellow college football fanatics. We're already 2 weeks in, and we have a lot to break down, and we finally have more than a one-game sample size for some teams. Not all teams. Notre Dame and TCU, I'm paying attention to you. They had a bye week in week 2, and there's actually a pretty big game that Notre Dame's playing, and you may have heard of it. Texas A&M is fulfilling the home and home series by traveling to Notre Dame in week 3. That will be a game that we will be previewing potentially tonight, as we're going live again tonight at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. So you will want to be tuned in for that. But if not, we will get to it Wednesday. I want to make sure that I have all hands on deck mentally for my previews, and Notre Dame's only played one game sample size, and I have not watched any A&M football right now. Make sure before we begin to like, share, subscribe, to hype the stream if possible. There's this new feature on YouTube called hyping, where you have to click this button in the comment section, and it will help get the video and the stream into the algorithm. My apologies for not being live yesterday. I had to find a new type of studio. Straight up, I had to reconfigure my studio and set different things up and just get organized again. But there are changes that have been made, as you can tell. Welcome to the new environment, the new background, and also some other things that I'll showcase from here on out. But we should be more on schedule than we ever have been. We're going live tonight again at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time, not 6 p.m. as we usually try and do, but that way we'll be live on time Wednesday, and tomorrow we can focus on some other topics that I want to discuss outside of the live shows. But thank you so much for tuning in. I want to talk about, obviously, Oklahoma and Michigan. Wanted to talk about Florida and USF, and I think I'll lead off the show with that for 5 minutes or so, but we won't make really a dedicated segment on it. I don't think that there's much to take away from that game other than what we already knew about Billy Napier as a coach. And honestly, I don't have much of a game reaction for it. We've seen Notre Dame lose to Northern Illinois and then go on to win several playoff games and play for a national title. I'm not saying Florida will do that. I struggle to even imagine that as a possibility. But could he win enough games to secure his job because of the whole Lagway Achilles heel? No one will want to see him enter the portal or even think about that. And Florida has some chaos in their administration. So there are several incentives to keep Napier around as long as he gives enough of a food trail for the administration to eat up, and that's, at least going bowling with a winning record again, probably, with how tough their schedule is. So make sure again to like, subscribe, hit the bell. We have a lot to talk about today because later tonight I want to do previews so that I'm not having to get those out Wednesday or late Tuesday. I want those out tomorrow morning. So we're jam-packed here. Absolutely jam-packed. And I don't think there is a better place to start off than talking a little bit of Billy Napier and maybe our first hot seat segment of the entire season. So Florida, and I said this on Twitter, Florida is a team where when you watch them play and you look at how, whether it's, how Josh Pate talks about their program and how he says they do a lot of things right. And honestly, I think they do. I think you just look at how they've recruited and how they have, Caleb Banks and Tyreek Sapp and Jake Slaughter. And their strength and conditioning, I would think at least, has to be somewhat decent. And they recruit well, and they're aligned enough to be paying players. But my problem is that Florida comes across as this team that believes that bicep veins and defined muscles and recruiting and effort are enough to win games. They're not enough to win games. I hate to tell you there. I really hate to tell you. It's not enough to win games. I mean, that was why Notre Dame lost to Miami. They had the effort. They have the necessary development. They have the players, but Miami outcoached them. And Miami, since they also had the effort, the roster, the development, some matchup advantages, home field advantage, Hard Rock Stadium actually being sold out, and superior coaching moves, specifically at coordinator, propelled Miami to win. Florida is a team that has no special coordinators. They don't have a head coach that's worth a damn. They're not they're not an elite football team. This isn't like 2001 Miami where you actually don't have many special coordinators, but your staff is so ridiculously, or not staff, your roster is so ridiculously talented that you win it all. That you are this amazing team and one of the best teams of all time. Florida, in this matchup, they were in the 0th percentile per game on paper. This is a new website that I'm going to use fairly often on here, especially in deeper dives. Per game on paper, their run stuff rate on defense was 4%. That's awful. Their third down success rate on offense, DJ Lagway is supposed to be this elite quarterback, and admittedly I fell for it. I was a little bit more cautious than some others were, especially after hearing the camp injury news. I kind of pulled back on him a little bit, but still had him as a top 10 QB, close to top 5, maybe even inside the top 5. Shame on me. Florida's expected points added per rush was negative. It was negative 0.08. That means every time they ran the ball, they lost points, essentially. And this is with a Florida offensive line that has a reputation of being one of the best in America, of having several NFL players, of being big, physical. Again, with the whole, I'm not well defined, I'm not a bodybuilder, I want to get in better shape. But again, Florida genuinely thinks that doing this, like flexing and not giving up, will win you football games. It's insane. Their play calling is terrible. I mean, they had that play where it's 3rd and short, and it's a run play up the middle because you want to end the game. You're in USF territory. They have a wide receiver basically functioning as a blocking halfback in the backfield. In what, even against a team like USF who is physically outmatched, in what world do you do that? In what world? Are you kidding me here? South Florida, they actually ran the ball better than Florida. Large part of that was QB runs by Byron Brown, always having a numbers advantage in the box. You typically always have that when you run your quarterback. It's a big part of the reason why John Mateer in Oklahoma had a more consistent run game than Michigan did. Michigan's run game in terms of like being able to dominantly block downfield and run the ball with your halfbacks was better than Oklahoma's, although both D-lines won the line of scrimmage in that matchup. But Oklahoma intelligently ran the ball, while Michigan just kind of shoved their running backs in a blender and didn't give them all that much help. That's sort of what Florida did. The amount of questionable calls in this game, from that 3rd and short, 3rd and manageable, to Lagway overthrowing 2 wide open receivers in the end zone when they had to settle for a field goal, to, I would say, just there were so many things that went, to the fact that when watching the film, when going back over the game, I could not tell who the superior physical team was. There's no point in talking about good or bad players in the sense that, USF might be a good team. Yeah, they might. The public is on Miami, strongly on Miami so far. They don't typically bet this early, but, early bets are saying that people are on South Florida to a certain degree. The money percentage is higher on Miami, and the spread is growing in Miami's direction. Like, I'm going to preview this game, but I think it's unlikely that USF extends their streak over ranked teams to 3. Can they do it? Yes. May I pick them to do it? I'll have to rewatch some film, but possibly yes. But there's no reason to lose this game. I mean, USF had a sack and 7 TFLs. they had more TFLs and they had more pressure than Florida did. Florida ran one of the dumbest trick plays I've ever seen as well, where they had Lagway line up as a wide receiver, and he somehow got the ball when the original ball carrier, I believe a halfback in the backfield, he could have taken off and ran for, I mean, he had open space. He could have taken it to the end zone, I think. But instead, somehow Lagway ends up with the ball, and it's this super awkward play that I think ends in a loss. Lagway, speaking of which, clearly hasn't thrown the football that much. Florida has no wide receivers that I care about. Like, okay, they have Dallas Wilson, who's really talented. Again, talent does not equal success. It's the most important piece to winning a national championship, but Florida hasn't won more than 8 games since 2020. And that was with head coach Dan Mullen, who's now the head coach at UNLV, and before that was on TV for a few years. Florida's not competing for national titles. They were never going to compete for a national title this year anyway. Ever. That was never going to happen, even if things panned out their way, because of the tough schedule, and they're just not there yet roster-wise or coaching-wise to get through a tough schedule and then win it all in the current playoff field. They do not have several elite alien impact players. They have some, but they should have more with their talent level, and yet they don't. That, plus the coaching decisions and the fact that Napier is 20-20 in his first 4 seasons, the fact that they are close to double-digit underdogs against LSU, they will be underdogs to Miami, they may be double-digit underdogs to Texas. How do you think this team is going to improve from last year? Lagway should have been better. He has looked pretty questionable. Their offense kind of looks slow, and that's putting it kindly. The only positives I had for Florida in watching that game and then rewatching parts of the game is they clearly have players on the defensive line. Their defensive line's pretty awesome. Their defense is good, but I don't think that South Florida's offense is also amazing. So I wonder if Miami and LSU will have success against this defense we just haven't seen yet. And Trey Smack is a wonderful kicker. Those are the only positives. And this is Florida. This is not, it's not, this isn't Long Island University, who, by the way, beat Eastern Michigan in a really hilarious game. This is Florida. You're supposed to compete for SEC championships and college football playoff appearances. Seriously. So that was the disaster of the week. That was the disaster of the week. Make sure, again, if you're on here, to like, subscribe, hit the bell, sign up for our YouTube memberships if you have the opportunity to. We kind of quietly released those a few days ago, made a YouTube post about it. There's different perks for each membership tier. We have 3 of them, tried to make them affordable. And we'll be adding new stuff to those different tiers. So we'll be starting the perks and benefits. Next week is when we'll be starting those, with a dedicated day for a member-only live show, for maybe once a week or here and there a member-only video. We'll have a lot of fun with those different things. So sign up as a member if you haven't already. If you do want to say something, I will try to answer comments in between segments if there's something insightful. If you want a guaranteed answer, send me a super chat in between the segments. And thank you so much for all of you, or to all of you, for being on here. I really appreciate the support, the love, the encouragement. This is what we do best here, and our goal is to reach 100,000 subscribers pretty soon, because I believe in our coverage, in our community. I think this can be the best college football channel on YouTube. And a big part of the reason why we can be that is because we cover games that no one else covers. We also cover the games everyone else covers too. But I want to talk about Minnesota against Northwestern State. And the reason I want to talk about this is not because you can get a ton of takeaways from this game. It's more so because when I look at how many points Minnesota scored in a half, that's unreal, and that's just something that I have to talk about. It's something that I have to discuss. So I want to talk about what took place on Saturday, which was an absolute bloodletting against, yes, a very terrible FCS team, but we will get to that in due time. Minnesota emasculated Northwestern State in a FBS on FCS, or more so Big Ten on FCS day of violence for the Gophers. They scored 59 points in the first half en route to a 66-0 shutout. Pretty incredible, if I do say so myself. I don't care that Northwestern State might be one of the worst teams that any FBS school will play all year. I don't care about that. Putting up 59 points in a half is pretty impressive, to say the least. It's a very impressive performance, highlighted by good coaching, and I think more importantly, pretty awesome defense. Pretty incredible defense by the Minnesota Golden Gophers, who per ESPN's efficiency metrics actually have a top 5 defense right now. Top 5, which is pretty awesome. Pretty cool to see a former Big Ten West, smaller Big Ten school represented in that category. We'll see if it's maintained, but when you have Coy Parrish, when you have Maverick Baranowski, when you have some of the playmakers that they do, that the Gophers do on defense, I like their odds of being one of the nation's top defenses. And I think that the play, the film that I watched and digested, the box score, the advanced analytics, I think they all pretty much back this up, that Minnesota has really good players on defense. I think that the epitome of Minnesota football right now are 2 players, corner John Nestor and running back Darius Taylor. I think those are the epitome of Minnesota football right now. And I say that because Nestor comes in from Iowa, where he was a bit, on and off, bit inconsistent. That's probably why he was able to leave Iowa. Iowa's a pretty good reputation with DBs, and so does Minnesota. But he goes to Minnesota, starting corner there. He has a pick 6 to open up the game, first play of the game, John Nestor pick 6, and number 17 continued to make amazing plays all day. He had a key tackle with a hard hit, and he also had another interception on the day. You go to Darius Taylor, and Darius Taylor, he didn't run that much. I think he got a little dinged up early, so they took him out. He had 3 carries for 20 yards, 6.7 yards per carry, had 1 reception for 9 yards. But we've seen before, whether it was last year or 2023, and for part of this year, Darius Taylor's a pretty gritty back. Darius Taylor, unlike Muhammad Ibrahim, and Muhammad Ibrahim was very gritty as well, one of the better running backs in college football when he was at Minnesota. But Ibrahim had superior offensive lines to work with. Taylor has never really had a complete offensive line, whether it's led by John Michael Schmitz or whether he had, great tackles such as Ariante Arce, although Taylor had those in 23 and 24. But the offensive line wasn't up to the usual Minnesota standard last year or the year before that. I still don't know if it's up to that standard this year, if I'm being really honest about it. I don't. We'll have to see. Northwestern State was horrible. Buffalo is a MAC school. We'll get a better idea when they travel out to California week 3, which is a game we will be previewing. So hit the notification bell on the Minnesota Football podcast playlist that I have attached to the video, and also hit the notification bell on the channel. But Taylor's gritty. Taylor works hard. Taylor compensates for his teammates and picks them up, helps them, doesn't hold them back. That's Minnesota football. Minnesota football is a developmental school that plays hard. They're gritty. They're tough. They're fundamentally sound. I mean, the tackling in this game was on point. Again, it's Northwestern State, but they're fundamentally sound. The defense had 2 sacks, 6 tackles for loss. Number 0, Anthony Smith, their best defensive end, he looked great. He accounted for all 2 sacks. Something else to keep in mind is that Drake Lindsey has a ceiling, and I mean a ceiling. He only had 9 pass attempts, but some of those pass attempts, he put a beautiful amount of air under the ball. Some of those pass attempts were underthrown, but it's clear that his arm talent is above Brosmer's. That's clear. And I think with how young he is, the more playing time he has, the better he'll get as the season goes on. Defense, we already talked about it a little bit. Anthony Smith, wonderful. Maverick Baranowski, great. John Nestor, fantastic. Coy Parrish, we all know him. He's an All-American. They're deep, though. They don't just have some stars. They are deep. And you also got to mention number 4 cornerback Saquon Bryan. Him and Baranowski each had a fumble. Matt Kingsbury, not Mac, but Matt Kingsbury, number 49, one of their backup linebackers, recovered a fumble for a touchdown. Minnesota showed off 6 different running backs. I know it's offense, but really the running back room and the entire defense are deep. And we also got to see Garrison Monroe, backup free safety, force a fumble, and Kingsbury recovered that fumble. So he had 2 fumble recoveries. It was a great game. Minnesota had over 250 rushing yards for 5.6 yards per carry, 5 rushing touchdowns. Lindsey and backup quarterback Max Shikinjansky looked pretty good. They had QBRs of 96 or above. I will say that if there was one thing that concerned me about this game, it is the fact that Minnesota may have the deepest running back room in college football, and they didn't quite have a lot of big runs or run for this electric dominant performance on the ground against Northwestern State. I mean, Northwestern State had a sack and 4 tackles for loss, and Minnesota struggled to run there a bit against Buffalo. So if there is one negative to take away from that performance, I do think it could be the offensive line, but we'll have to see. They ran for over 5 yards per carry. The running backs looked good. They had moments where they looked great in pass protection and run blocking, and ultimately they got a ton of playing time for their backups. This game did finish a bit early due to severe weather, but most of the game was played, so this was a game I wanted to react to because it's impressive to be up at halftime 59-0, no matter how good or bad your opponent is. Seriously, that is just, it's impressive, to be quite frank, that you can be up on a team by that much at halftime. Again, I don't care who that team is. That is absolutely impressive. It's incredibly impressive. I thought that Indiana had an impressive performance against Kennesaw State. I thought they had a nice bounce back game after a week 1 where they struggled to stop the run and only won by 13 points, 27-14 over Old Dominion. Although personally, I think they controlled the game there for the most part. The game was never really in doubt after the first quarter. It was a performance where Indiana left a lot on the field. They had missed 4th down conversions. They had some turnovers. It was overall a very sloppy game, a very sloppy performance. This performance was a bit more cleaned up. I mean, Indiana cleaned up their act, and they won 56-9. And they played more disciplined football. Not as many missed opportunities. I don't think Indiana turned it over once in this game. Did they? No, they did not. Instead, they forced 2 turnovers, an interception and a fumble recovery. Indiana also ran for over 300 yards, which is just, I don't think last year's Indiana team does that. And that's kind of where I want to start here in this reaction, is looking at Indiana and telling you that they improved on the offensive line and that I think their offensive line is really good. I think they're deeper there. I think they are bigger. They're more physical. I don't think Cignetti would tell you that this team is where he wants them to be, but I think they are closer to where he wants them to be than last year's team was. I really do believe that. They are closer. When you look at how they are getting down the field, sometimes beyond 5, 6, or 7 yards down the field, when Khalil Benson, who transferred in and wasn't projected to start for much of the preseason, is coming in at tackle and mauling people, has 2 key blocks. And it's not like Indiana's Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, Penn State. They're not even USC, Nebraska, or Wisconsin reputation-wise. Indiana as a program in the Big Ten has been, this is no offense to Indiana fans, they know this, it's been a gutter trash program. And yet I watch their offensive line, and I think it's better, I think, than Michigan's. It's better than Nebraska's, than Wisconsin's. I think it's better than Ohio State's in run blocking. I don't think it's better than theirs in pass blocking. Solely based on merit and not projections or preseason research, it looks better than Penn State's, though I think that's more of Penn State being basic and playing with their food. I'd say they have a better O-line in run blocking and pass blocking than Indiana for now, but some of that's projection. I don't know whether it is better or worse than USC's. I'd imagine it's worse than Oregon's, but Indiana's offensive line looks really good. I mean, every time Mendoza stepped back to throw, he had 3 or 4 seconds at minimum, and sometimes could have had more. He just had a wide open receiver and found him down the field. Mendoza is a quarterback that I like. However, I will come out and say, don't want to overreact. This isn't a for sure take here. I do think I was wrong in saying that he's better than Curtis Rourke. I think he has a higher ceiling than Curtis Rourke. That's for sure. But he also makes some risky throws that Rourke just never made. He doesn't take care of the football quite as well. Now, on top of having a higher caliber arm in terms of potential, he also is more mobile. He already has 53 rushing yards, a touchdown, 5.9 yards per carry. He hasn't thrown an interception yet, and he does have 4 passing touchdowns. And his game against Kennesaw State, I think, was better than his game against Old Dominion, though Old Dominion's probably a much better team than Kennesaw State. However, there is a floor to his game that I think can be a little bit concerning. There's some turnover-worthy throws he had, some throws like one where he made a throw to the end zone. I forget who it was to. I think it was to Surratt. I think it was to Surratt in the end zone, where the way he threw it, in my mind, I'm thinking if that were a Penn State or Ohio State defensive back, that's a pick. Could even be a pick six. So there are just some things there to keep in mind. I think Mendoza's more talented than Rourke for sure, but definitively better, I don't know. I think you got more variance there with Mendoza. Higher ceiling where your throws can be more accurate, can be more on time. I think he has a stronger arm. You also have that world, though, where he sometimes trusts that a bit too much and puts the ball into harm's way. Aiden Fisher and Elijah Hardy have speed. Those could be future NFL linebackers. Had a really good tackle for loss, and Indiana's defensive line did pretty well for much of the day. They typically only sent 4, sometimes bringing a safety or corner on the blitz and dropping one of their ends into coverage, so they had creative ways to get to the quarterback. But it was pretty basic, I thought, in a certain sense, and they really only sent 4, didn't have to send more than that. They got a few sacks, several tackles for loss in this matchup. It was impressive. 14 TFLs is something that's noteworthy, combining that with 316 yards, averaging 8.3 yards per carry. That's a pretty big deal right there. I think this defense is athletic. We've already talked about the offensive line for several minutes here. I think it's a really impressive, good offensive line. Could be one of the better ones in America, but I want to hold off on that for a bit. I do. I still think there's a little bit of depth concerns for Indiana as a whole team. That's really their limitation here. They have a national championship caliber staff with some really elite starters, but they just do not have the overall talent composite that Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, Penn State, and, even I know Michigan didn't look good, and I know USC hasn't looked good over the previous few seasons, but their talent composite's like still nothing compared to USC's or Michigan's. So, well, they scout well and develop incredibly well. And again, I think this staff with Michigan's talent or USC's talent or even maybe Nebraska's might be an obvious national title contender right now. Their talent's still far below that. They have the lowest blue chip ratio and the lowest team talent composite per 24/7 Sports in the entire Big Ten, not just amongst the current Big Ten teams who are ranked. But what I saw from Indiana against Kennesaw State was really encouraging. And while their run defense, there were some plays where it looked like Kennesaw State's quarterback, who I thought was impressive, could have taken it. And just those two different options still spooked the defense, and Kennesaw State was able to get some big runs and push at times. Overall, it was a much better performance against their opponent's rushing offense than in week one, and several backups got playing time. I mean, you had LeBron Bond, freshman wide receiver, get involved, and E.J. Williams, who hadn't really shined before at Indiana, he looked pretty good. So the defense being creative. Look, I think Kamara, Tyreek Tucker amongst the best defensive linemen in the Big Ten, perhaps America. Surratt's back, and I thought that Omar Cooper Jr. looked pretty good. I think this is a better quality Indiana team, especially in relationship to punching up and playing big-time teams, than Indiana fielded last season. And that's very important because they have two big games against Oregon on the road coming up in a few weeks. And then towards the end of the season, they have to play on the road against Penn State. Really high on this Indiana team. Never sold any stock in them. And I'm glad that I did not. And if you don't believe me, just watch Indiana. Watch them and their game against Kennesaw State. They're not going anywhere. As Bud Elliott so eloquently put on the Cover 3 podcast, they are not going anywhere. They're not. There is no way that team is bad. There's no way. I mean, I forgot to mention this. I got so carried away. But Indiana, they were in the 75th percentile or higher in expected points added, success rate, which success rate is gaining 50% of your yardage on first down, 70% of your yardage left on second down, and 100% of the remaining yardage on third down. That's how you calculate success rate. And then depending on whether or not you gain that much yardage in a play, it's a successful or non-successful play. Add those up and, take the successful plays and divide that by total plays, and you get your success rate right there. Indiana was phenomenal against Kennesaw State. Phenomenal. Now, I don't think Kennesaw State is this great team, but I also don't think that Indiana here was playing to their absolute ceiling either. I don't. Started off the year pretty shaky against Old Dominion. They have some new pieces. They need some more time to get going and to gel. And they have no incentive to show their whole playbook right now. No incentive at all. So let's move on and talk about Iowa State and Iowa. This was a classic Cyhawk game. Absolute classic right there. And I want to talk about it because I have some takeaways from this game that I think might shock people and that I would actually say are definitely unique to the channel here. What if I told you that I came away from Iowa traveling to Iowa State, and despite Iowa losing, I was encouraged by what Iowa did, and I gained respect from Iowa State despite their best win of the year in terms of opponent ranking at the time they played their opponent, Kansas State, now being a 1-2 football team who just lost to Army at home and looks like absolute trash. That opinion probably shocks many of you, but let me explain this and take you through a methodical journey. Iowa State beat Iowa 16-13. Iowa covered that 3.5-point line. I picked Iowa to win, and I was wrong, but at least I think I was right on a few things regarding Iowa and also regarding Iowa State, but also wrong on a few things with each team. So I want to take you through that here and look at these teams and what they did. And I think the perfect way to tell this story, since it is a matchup between two good teams. Let's get that out of the way. Let's start right here. These are two good teams. You can say, oh, Iowa couldn't pass the ball. Iowa couldn't pass the ball. You know what they did? They ran on Iowa State in a way that Kansas State could not. They did. And look, I know Kansas State's not a good team, but we knew from preseason research that Iowa was bringing back a good offensive line. Iowa's had some running backs emerge that I didn't exactly expect. And I hate to tell all of you this, but based on how Rocco Becht has played and how Iowa State's offense has played, I know that Iowa's reloaded on defense. They are at least as good as they were last season. And with how they defended Becht in a road environment when they couldn't get pressure on him, they may have a better defense than they did last year. And I think there's a strong chance of that happening as the season goes on, because this defense does have some youth, and not necessarily youth. They have a lot of age at linebacker, for example, but they don't have a ton of experience per se. So both of these teams really were in the mud. This was a classic Cy-Hawk game in which it was decided by less than a field goal. It was very back and forth. Both teams were physical. There were mistakes made. There was a back and forth about this game that made it very entertaining. And the game honestly blew by pretty quickly because both teams had long drives in that wonderful, honestly blissful. I love ugly football. I love it because even really good teams, elite teams, can play ugly football. Think back to 2023 Michigan, Penn State. That was an ugly game, but teams that finished both inside the top 5 in FPI to end the year, or at least Penn State was very close to top 5 in FPI. Think about Texas, Ohio State last year in the Cotton Bowl. Those were arguably the two best teams in America. They played ugly, I mean ugly football. That was not a game of fireworks that was very fun to watch. It wasn't. But both of these teams had drives at the end of the game where, look, Iowa had a 9-minute 28 drive in the third quarter. 9 minutes and 28 seconds. Crazy. They kick a field goal to tie it. Iowa State has a 6-minute drive that results in a punt in the fourth quarter. Then most of that drive was in the third quarter, but it ended in the fourth quarter. Iowa then has a 40-yard drive that's 5 minutes, punt. Iowa State has a 6-minute 30-second drive that ends in a field goal, the game-winning field goal, punt. Then Iowa, of course, turns it over on downs because they're not really equipped against a good defense to execute a 2-minute drill. Even though I think their receiver core is better than it was last year, and I like their passing offense more than what it was capable of last year. Iowa State and Iowa had about equivalent plays. Iowa controlled the clock. Iowa won the rushing battle, not decisively, but 4.1 yards per carry to 3.5 yards per carry, 148 rushing yards to 104 yards. And really, after that first quarter, if I got to be honest, after that first quarter, Iowa effectively controlled the game. I think that Iowa State just had such a good first quarter that allowed them, combined with superior quarterback play, to hold on and win the game. These are two pretty evenly matched teams, if I'm being honest here. No team averaged more than 5 yards per pass attempt. Iowa State had 5 yards per pass attempt. Iowa's was at 3.5. Iowa gave up 3 sacks, but they had an 83% power rushing success rate. Iowa State gave up no sacks and had a 100% power rushing success rate. Power rushing success rate means do you get 2 yards on your carry if you need 2 yards to pick up a first down. So whenever it was 2nd and 2 or 3rd and 2 or shorter or 1st and goal from the 2, these teams did a very good job of getting enough push to create long drives. That's why they had those long drives, because their power rushing success rate was incredible, especially with Iowa. Iowa had several drives where they never passed the football and they were able to move it because their offensive line's that good. Their rushing offense is that good. With Gronowski in there, it's as if Brennan Sullivan's back, but now is healthier and I think has a better arm. I know that Gronowski's arm hasn't looked amazing. It's been pretty bad, but I think that regression to the mean over the next few games will show that Gronowski's a better quarterback than the advanced analytics say right now. It's a very tight game. And look, credit to Iowa State again. I say again for proving me wrong here. Credit to them for doing that. I've picked against them twice now, and I'm 0-2. Picked Kansas State to beat them. Picked Iowa to beat them. No. Now they were close losses, so it's not like I was super off the mark. But Iowa State's this really gritty team. They're a team that I love to watch. I love to watch Iowa as well, don't get me wrong. But a takeaway I had outside of Iowa improving from 2024, and I think Iowa State may have actually improved from 2024, at least maintained what they were, which is impressive given the NFL receivers they lost, is that right now, Iowa State has built themselves into being Iowa. Iowa State has the defense and the size and potential on the offensive line and the tight ends that we know Iowa to have had or have right now. The difference is they have receivers and they have a quarterback. Iowa State right now reminds me of 2019 Iowa, where you had a quarterback in Nate Stanley, you had a receiver in Amir Smith-Marset, you had a defense that was top 10, you had a rushing attack that was pretty solid. I don't think Iowa State's rushing attack is as good as that 2019 Iowa rushing attack, but it's a good rushing attack. It's very reliable, not necessarily explosive, but it's very successful in power rushing, and that's something that we discussed when they played Kansas State, is Iowa State doesn't get these big, long runs, but they can reliably pick up 2, 3, 4, 5 yards per carry when they need to. Iowa State is a superior Iowa. That's what they are. So that could be interpreted as humiliating for Iowa because your rival has become you, but better, and they've won 3 to the last 4 against you. But it's also a compliment to Iowa State. And I'm not saying that Iowa State, if they were to play Iowa again, would beat them 10 out of 10 times on a neutral field. In fact, I'd go with it's probably a 50-50 split, or neutral field, I might even lean Iowa. I still think that Iowa is better at some things relating to their identity than Iowa State is. But Iowa State's tight ends are crazy good. They're really effective blockers, whether on pull blocking or straight up blocking. I mean, I remember looking at the film and watching it here, and Tyler Miller for Iowa State had a wonderful block for Carson Hansen to burst through in the first quarter. And then, like, the next play or a few plays later, Gabe Burkle comes in and just lays the wood on an Iowa defender. Same thing with center Dylan Barrett. And Gabe Burkle's just one of their phenomenal tight ends. Benjamin Brahmer made their only touchdown catch of the day in the end zone as Iowa was playing perfect coverage on him. And you also had, at the end of the day, another great pass. Well, not a great pass. It was a tipped pass in the air, but I believe it was caught by Burkle. I don't know, because Iowa State has so many good tight ends. So you have Gabe Burkle, you have Benjamin Brahmer. I forget who caught it. I think it was Gabe Burkle, but I could be wrong. They have wonderful tight ends. Iowa State does. Very talented. They're insane. The offensive line's also fixed their pass blocking issues. A lot of that was missed assignments against Kansas State. They gave up no sacks against an Iowa defensive line that I think is more talented than the defensive line they had last season. I was very impressed with Iowa State in this game. But I was also impressed with Iowa. Like, a few key takeaways I have for Iowa is that they're better than they were last year. And a lot of that is because they weren't high in returning production, but all the players they brought back were quality players. Think about their running backs. They're at least average, if not above average. Think about Addison Ostrenga. Think about him, and think about his backup. Think about Iowa's entire tight end room. So, Addison Ostrenga got hurt in this game, and then you got Hayden Large as their fullback. They're at least deep there. They're at least, again, average. Their receivers aren't very good. That's the one bad part of their returning production they brought back. But no one was crying over losing McNamara or Sullivan to the portal. And I think Gronowski's better than both of them. Their offensive line, Jennings Dunker, Bo Steffens, Logan Jones at center. Those are all quality players. Logan Jones could be in the NFL right now, potentially starting, possibly, if he wanted to. Returning Xavier Nwampka, Cohen Entrinker, Aaron Graves, Max Llewellyn. They have a lot of good players that came back. Drew Stevens at kicker, right? Reese Dakin at punter. Most of their returning production was quality, and with Lester being in his second year and getting a superior quarterback, I think they're a better team than they were last year. I truly believe that. Now, with Iowa State, I don't quite know, because I think Iowa State, as we saw last year, had a higher ceiling than Iowa did, much higher with the offense they had. But I'd be inclined to think Iowa State does too. I think their defense is better than it was last year. I think Becht is playing better than he did last year. And I think their rushing attack is superior as well. A question I want to ask before we really get on out of here with this segment is Iowa's secondary better? Has it been fixed? Because part of me thinks with Chase Sowell and Benjamin Brahmer and Burkle and Eskildson, who's come on the scene and been really good, and Iowa holding Iowa State to 5 yards per pass attempt in their own place, I wonder if they've fixed it. I wonder. That'll be something to pay attention to when Iowa plays Rutgers in 2 weeks. Rutgers has the best receivers Iowa will have faced so far in the month of September. So that'll be a test, especially with it being, again, on the road like this game was. But at the end of the day, I think both teams are pretty good here. And I think that Iowa State can contend for the playoffs because they're 3-0 and their schedule is easier than Iowa, and they can reach the Big 12 championship game and win it again. With how they're playing right now and winning, Iowa State might be one of the few Big 12 teams to where if all hell breaks loose and there's chaos, they can get an at-large bid. Iowa, I don't think, can reach the playoffs, especially with a loss here and how tough their schedule is, but they can contend for 7, 8, 9 wins, which with how much they lost and the schedule they have, which is tougher than last year, I think would be a success and a little bit of a feather in Kirk Ferentz's cap. Now we can talk about Michigan and Oklahoma. This is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is the game everyone has been waiting for. So we're going to get to that and discuss it. This is incredible. And it's incredible because I wanted to pick Michigan later in the week, but I held myself back from doing it and thought to myself, hey, look, it's Brent Venables against a true freshman quarterback. Week 2, just don't get ahead of yourself. Don't do it. And I'm so happy that I didn't, because this game could have been a blowout. It could have looked like 2019 Wisconsin versus Michigan. And I think Michigan fans know what I'm talking about there, where your coaching staff doesn't know what they're doing. Your team is not fundamentally sound. They are missing plays that they should be making. It was not a good performance at all. Oklahoma played closer to their ceiling than Michigan did, but I think in this game, in Norman, even if Michigan played closer to their ceiling than Oklahoma, it would have been very hard for Michigan to win with the staff and roster that they currently have. I mean, this was bad. This was a bad performance for Michigan. It was worse than I expected, and I expected Michigan to lose this game straight up. I expected them, got something in my eye here, I expected them to lose. But my score prediction was something along the lines of, I gave it live with Jay and Darren They run wonderful channels, by the way. Check out Locked On Sooners, and I think it's Unfair Sports is what the two operations that Jay runs. And also check out Darren Talks Ball, and This Week in Michigan Football, the two channels that he runs. They're both, very knowledgeable, very entertaining. I could listen to them talk all day. I said publicly with them 24-22 Oklahoma, and Michigan winning several different battles, but just coming up short because I think Mateer at that point was better than Underwood. Also believe that Oklahoma would have more success in the red zone. Now, I was right on those accounts, but I was wrong on the fact that Michigan would show up and possibly be the superior-looking team here. I was absolutely wrong, completely wrong on that front. So I want to get into more of why that was, because I think the reasons are a little bit jarring, and I think people, whether it's because of narratives or because it's week 2 and it was a top 20 matchup, the best game of week 2, so we want to overreact, I think there are some incorrect ways of interpreting this matchup. Oklahoma was the better team. They beat Michigan, and they beat them by 2 scores. They beat them by double digits here, 24-13, covering that 3.5-point spread, which is where the line closed. In hindsight, I'm shocked that it was that low in Oklahoma's favor, because the line at one point was 6.5. I guess that a lot of sharps came in and bet Michigan Friday and Saturday before kickoff. I guess that's what happened, but we're not here to really talk about the betting angle here. We're here to talk about the game, the stats, the info, how this game played out, some key plays and players, and who won. Oklahoma. Why did Oklahoma win? Because Oklahoma was better coached, because they hit harder, they played tougher, they endured the pain, and they didn't quit. Michigan at one point was dropping like flies in this matchup, and Michigan, I think, didn't handle the adversity quite as well as Oklahoma did. Now, that could be because I think Oklahoma is a little bit older. Definitely think a part of the reason why is because they for sure have a better staff. That is certain. I'm absolutely certain about that. Michigan had some matchup advantages they could have exploited here to make this game closer, to potentially win, although I have said in the preseason, as someone who was higher on Michigan than I think most were, that I just didn't see a way for Michigan to really win this game unless they were obviously better than Oklahoma. And I didn't think they were in the preseason. And after week 1, I thought to myself, well, I don't know much about these teams. They both have issues, but both played poorly enough in week 1 to where I couldn't change my mind in favor of Michigan. So I went with Oklahoma, and Oklahoma even outperformed my expectations because they beat Michigan harder than I thought they were going to. And I thought Oklahoma was going to win, and I thought that, there were some people who thought that, Michigan was going to win in dominant fashion with how Underwood performed. That was never going to happen. There are also people who think that after this game, Oklahoma is a top 10 team. I'm pretty skeptical of that with some of the mistakes that they made. And the fact that, look, they controlled the clock. They had 32 minutes, 12 seconds of possession to Michigan's 24-48. They had 7.9 yards per attempt through the air. Michigan had 5.9, and Underwood was 9 of 24. The fact that Michigan's receivers at times were getting open, and the fact that Oklahoma was calling drastically better plays and typically had a numbers advantage offensively or defensively in the box, and yet couldn't generate the same type of, running back success that Michigan could, I think is pretty concerning, because I don't exactly think that Michigan is this all outer world team as their play on the offensive line, secondary, and really the entirety of the offense showed. I thought Underwood played well. Mateer obviously played great, though, and Underwood did not play great. He played about as good as you could expect a true freshman to realistically play on the road with the talent surrounding him at night against a Brent Venables defense where I have to tell you something, and this is a credit to Venables. It's a credit to his staff and to Oklahoma. They clearly understood that this was a do-or-die game, that they had to win. Clearly. And I think in a certain sense it actually hurt them. Out of halftime, Oklahoma kind of flinched a little bit with some of those special teams errors, the penalties, giving Michigan life. I think that Oklahoma understands that if they don't win X amount of games, their team is done, that Venables is done. If Oklahoma somehow lost that game to Michigan, which at points in the third quarter it looked like they maybe could have given Michigan the game, Venables should have just resigned. Because if you couldn't beat Michigan with that type of play that the Wolverines put forth, you're probably not beating Auburn. You're sure as heck not beating Texas. You're probably not beating Alabama, even with the issues they have. Probably not LSU, Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss, South Carolina. Like, it would have been so bad. The way Michigan played in that first half told me that if Michigan somehow won, that was probably more of an indictment on Oklahoma at this point than Michigan being a top 10 or even close to a top 5 team. That's what that would have told me. But Oklahoma, to their credit, they held on, and they won by double digits. And I think Mateer, while not the best quarterback in the nation, he outplayed Underwood. He was the better player. He was a good leader. He made some runs with some, jitterbug movements with his legs where he certainly is someone who, at least to this point, should be in the Heisman conversation. And he made some throws where I will tell you, I don't think he's Cam Ward, and I think some people are too high on him, but he made some beautiful touch passes where he could layer the ball. Like that play to Kanak, who Kanak is someone I will give all of the praise in the world to switch from linebacker to tight end and be that physical and blocking, to make amazing catches, to be that long and fast. He looks like a natural at tight end. So many teams could use him as their starting tight end. That throw on 3rd and long where he layered it in between the zone, perfect. Absolutely perfect. Now, another pass to Kanak later in the game on that double reverse flea flicker, that was bad. Wide open, don't know why he overthrew it. The other pass where I think he sailed Kanak again, and it was intercepted by TJ Metcalf, that was also bad. Just was. But overall, he had a QBR in the 70s. His rushing was paramount to Oklahoma's success. I thought after the game that maybe Arbuckle had some bad play calls, but I don't think so. I think Arbuckle actually called the perfect game. I just think their roster is limited to where he can't probably do everything he wants to do. Like, they really have to go through Mateer in almost every way offensively to have success, especially against a defense like Michigan's. Michigan had some success running the ground, all in the second half. There were some moments where they were able to run well and get good push in the second half, but that first half was so bad for the O-line that whatever they did in the second half just couldn't really make up for that, if I'm being honest. And it's not encouraging when Giovanni El-Hadi, who should be your best offensive lineman, it's not encouraging when he goes out and your offensive line looks better after he's out. Not saying he's a bad player. I hope he is healed. It sounds like he's day-to-day, which is good. But Michigan had some pretty egregious coaching errors, I would say, on the offensive side of the football. At the end of the day, another key difference was Oklahoma was able to successfully convert some additional 3rd and shorts in addition to 3rd and longs and get a 4th down conversion. Michigan could not convert on 3rd and long really to save their life. And that final 4th down at the end of the day was the epitome of the game. Run up the middle. Oklahoma is clearly sending 7 guys forward. You only have 5 up front to block. Boom. Dead. Game over. And the game was already over at that point. Michigan had no timeouts and they were down 11. But that was really the epitome of the game right there for the Wolverines. I think that when I go back and observe this game, and when I watched some film and just digested it, because it was a game later at night, my emotions were pretty high because that game was competitive enough to keep me interested. And then Michigan State, Boston College was just, touchdown, 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 big play, big play. That was a really exciting game that we'll get to later. Shout out to Michigan State for earning that big win. Oklahoma earned a big win here, and I think that a key takeaway I would have from each of these teams is Oklahoma needs to stay healthy and Michigan needs to figure out their future and identity. I didn't think Michigan would have an identity crisis until next year, when they would lose much of their offensive line. Most of their O-line right now are seniors, and they would lose the vast majority of their defensive line, again, who are seniors.
Now, this defensive line I could identify against New Mexico clearly took a step back in pass rush. I don't think their run defense is bad. Oklahoma, when they ran the ball, almost always had a numbers advantage, whether due to, good blocking schemes or John Mateer doing quarterback run. He was their leading rusher. I don't think Michigan's defensive line or defense in general is actually worse at stopping the run than it was last year. However, their pass rush is much worse. And Michigan has been able to tip their cap and hang their hat on the fact that they can get pressure with 4. I don't think this team can do that against good offensive lines. The secondary is just not as physical, not as good at tackling as they were under Minter or McDonald. That was evident last year. It's a similar theme this year. And on offense, Michigan, when they put extra guys on the offensive line, that Justice Haynes run for a touchdown, that 75-yarder, for example, Michigan had 8 players blocking, all tight ends, all offensive linemen. They had success there. There were a lot of other plays where Michigan was going in spread, and for whatever reason running it on downs where you needed to pass or running it into stacked boxes where based on the play, you knew that you were not going to have success against that Oklahoma front based on previous plays and Oklahoma really eating up Michigan's offense early in the game and establishing control. So with Oklahoma, the healthy portion is your depth is still questionable. And there are parts of your team that are not high quality. So say Mateer goes down because you keep running him and you have to bring in Michael Hawkins again, well, the season's over. So it's very key that not just with Mateer, but your receivers and your defense, because Burks is really good, Keontez Lewis looks good. Your freshman tackle, Michael Fasusi, very talented, clearly a hit out of high school. Got to make sure he stays healthy. Have to make sure of those things, and that your offensive line as a whole does. I think that, I don't know. There's just a lot to take away from this game that could be an overreaction, could be an underreaction. But my takeaways and key reactions are this. Both defensive lines are great. I thought that Derek Moore, opening play of the game, great read on Mateer, quarterback run, tackles him in the backfield. I thought that Dominic Williams, I thought that Jaden Jackson, David Stone, did a pretty impressive job up front. Thought they did a really good job in that interior. Kip Lewis did a great job. Oklahoma, for the most part, locked down Michigan's wide receivers. For the most part. Again, not always. I think that both D-lines ate up both offensive lines. That's a takeaway that I have. Another takeaway is that Oklahoma has really good wide receivers. They're better than I thought. Deion Burks is healthy. He looks wonderful. Clearly athletic. Keontez Lewis is a hit in the portal for Oklahoma there. And I also like, again, Kanak. So they have a good tight end, 2 good receivers. Jaden Ott right now isn't healthy from what I understand, but I thought that at times their younger running backs than Javante Barnes looked good. So I'm not super concerned about Oklahoma's backfield, not uber concerned. Don't think it's the best thing in the world either, but look, Oklahoma, they have good skill position players. And you could also tell Oklahoma's offensive line is old and they're well coached. I think Beatonbaugh's a good O-line coach, and this O-line's old. They beat Michigan's pass rush, lost to them in run blocking, but to simply beat Michigan's defensive line at one thing, I thought was impressive. Occasionally, Michigan did get through them, whether it was with blitzes or sometimes getting through on 4 or covering downfield well enough to where Mateer had to, jitterbug around, and they sometimes got to him. But most of the time, they did a really good job protecting John Mateer. I actually thought for Michigan, speaking of their offensive line, that Evan Link played a good game relative to facing off against an elite Oklahoma defense. He had a really key block on that long 75-yard run, And from my understanding, watching that game, he was not responsible. He was not the sole responsible reason why Michigan's run blocking was suspect or why they would sometimes give up large amounts of pressure to Underwood or why they gave up a sack to him. Overall, relative to what I would have expected Evan Link and Michigan's struggling tackles out of them, I thought that Link performed okay, number 71 there. Fasusi performed better. Fasusi was probably the offensive lineman of the entire game. One last thing before we move on. Michigan got outcoached by Oklahoma, and it's worse than you think. It's so much worse than you think. So Michigan has the ball. They're down 21-7. It's 3rd and 6. And Lindsey or Moore, whoever's calling plays, I'm just going to go with Lindsey, decides to run it up the middle on 3rd and medium. And then it's 4th and 2. You got 3 or 4 2 yards. Enough to probably run the same play again if you bring in another offensive lineman and get the 4th down and 2. And you kick a field goal to only be down by 11. And I'm thinking to myself, and I'm kind of scratching my head and thinking, what? Why make that play call if you're going to kick the field goal? If you're going to go for it, that's the perfect play call. But if you're just going to kick the field goal, why? Why? And another thing, too, is Michigan had a penalty EPA. This is something that Darren pointed out to me from Darren Talks Ball. Michigan had a penalty EPA of 5.97. That is crazy. They had 5.97 expected points from penalties and did nothing with it. And they won the turnover battle and yet lost by 11. This game, if Oklahoma were a top 10 team, it would have been 34-13. It would have been worse. But because Oklahoma had enough issues, they have definitely some anxiety because their coaches and players are feeling the pressure. Because of those things, Michigan was able to stay in the game. And to be fair to Michigan's coaches and players, I thought they won the second half, but it was by about this much. And a lot of it was due to self-inflicted injury by Oklahoma. Oklahoma dominated the first half. Just beyond dominated the first half. It could have easily been 21-0 or 17-0 at the end of the first half if Oklahoma doesn't have a drop on their second possession that forced them to punt. Could have easily been that way. And then Michigan, punting inside the Oklahoma 40, when you have a good defense and you were able to force some punts, it's like, what are you doing? Man, come on. The Sooners at the end of the day just hit harder. They gave more effort. They were more physical. And they outcoached Michigan. They checked all the necessary boxes to achieve a win. I'm excited to watch Oklahoma for the rest of the year. Very pumped to see what they can do against Auburn. Actually excited to watch their performance this week against Temple. It's on the road, is a classic letdown spot. So that game, I think, will tell me a lot about the character and depth and energy that this team has in the tank. For Michigan, they play Central Michigan, and with Biff Poggi being named the interim head coach while Moore serving his 2-game suspension, you got to go out there and you have to win that game by as many points as possible and show fire, because Michigan's future right now is very shaky. There are aspects of Oklahoma's future that are shaky too. Oklahoma's future is definitely shaky, but the way that Oklahoma is recruiting and the way that Oklahoma is moving to a new conference, and Venables entered this year on the hot seat, that's not a surprise that Oklahoma's future was shaky. For Michigan's future to be this shaky when they are winning off the field recruiting-wise in a way that Oklahoma is not, when they, were a better team last year than Oklahoma was, and a better team every year from 2021 to last year than Oklahoma was, it is more shocking that Michigan's future is this questionable. Very shocking. Now, we can move on to Illinois and Duke. And just for a PSA, just for a public service announcement, after this, there will be a commercial break after this. Nice to see that we almost have 100 concurrent viewers. This is pretty awesome. Very awesome. So we're going to talk now about Illinois and Duke. And make sure, if you haven't already, to comment at me in the live chat. If you want me to say something back to your comment, guaranteed. You can always send a super chat. and join our channel. Sign up to be a member. You get shout outs, priority replies to comments. For different membership tiers, there will even be a private live stream for members. With me, you get to ask me questions. I get to make here and there content that you want me to make when I have the time. And those things will be starting next week, that special content. There will be announcements made in my community, in my Discord server. By the way, join the Discord server. Link is down in the description, live description. Just click the Discord server link. You will join. It's totally free. You get to interact with me along with tons of other college football fans. Just do it. It's that simple. Let's talk about Illinois beating down on Duke. The Illinois Fighting Illini entered Duke. They went in to North Carolina and earned a victory. Illinois beats Duke 45-19, winning the turnover battle by +5. Illinois covers that valuable 3.5-point spread. I was wrong here. This was one of my worst picks, probably my worst pick of week 2. I thought that Duke was going to win. I thought that Duke would show themselves as the better team and that they would beat Illinois. And instead what I got is Illinois winning this game by 26 points, winning the turnover battle by 5, and ultimately controlling this game throughout the second half and also out-coaching Duke. Clearly out-coaching Duke. If you disagree with me on that standpoint, watch the second half and tell me why Duke didn't decide to change their coverage schemes. Because what Illinois was doing was abusing Duke's man coverage, Manny Diaz's man coverage. They were finally picking up blitzes. They were cutting off wide receivers, covering them very well. And at the end of the day, Illinois had about 13-minute possession advantage, which is pretty crazy. 36 minutes, 12 seconds of possession for Illinois on 73 plays. Duke had 63 plays, 23 minutes, 48 seconds, because Duke, when they did get down the field and score, they did it pretty quickly, and other times they really just fizzled out. Yardage-wise, these teams were pretty equal, and that somewhat surprised me, if I'm being honest. Both teams had over 400 yards of total offense. I thought that both quarterbacks played well. I believe that both of these are, above average, good caliber teams. And look, this was a game decided by the inches. Duke had 438 total yards. Illinois had 419. They both had over 20 first downs. The difference was the 5 turnovers. And the fact that once Illinois started stacking up turnovers, I think it was the 3rd turnover, it became very clear that Illinois had gassed Duke's defense a little bit, and they were going to, pull away and ultimately win this football game. So that was a very fascinating game, very fascinating performance, I will say, from Illinois, winning the turnover battle that decisively and having themselves quite a day. They're now ranked in the top 10. I think they're ranked in the top 10 for the first time since that 2001 or maybe 2007 season. 2001, they went 10-2, won the Big Ten. They actually went 10-1 in the regular season, just lost to Nick Saban's LSU in, I believe it was the Sugar Bowl. And then in 2007, they went 9-4, lost to USC and one of the strong Pete Carroll squads in the Rose Bowl. When you win in that fashion, 45-19, a lot of people overreact. Tons of them do. Now, people are going to say this is me not giving Illinois credit here. And maybe I'm not giving them enough credit. Maybe so. However, I will also say that, again, this was a game decided by the margins, decided by the inches. Duke was not ranked. Illinois is now ranked top 10. Is there really that much difference? Is there really that much difference between these two teams? Really? Because Duke got 4 sacks. Illinois got 2. Neither team was able to run the ball all that well, which wasn't incredibly shocking for Duke, but for someone who might just casually follow Illinois with the reputation of Bielema, that's probably a surprise. Duke failing on a 4th down Illinois being 100% on a fourth down also had an impact. Like, at the end of the day, Illinois was basically +6 in the turnover battle if you factor in that failed fourth down that Duke had. It's crazy. You can't win games like that. You can't do it. And Illinois was more disciplined. Illinois outcoached Duke. Illinois had the better quarterback than Duke. Their receivers, particularly wide receiver Justin Bowick, I think was a welcome surprise and performed at a very high level, a level that certainly impressed me. My question is, how good is Illinois, truthfully? And also, how does Duke rebound? So with Illinois, they are ranked right now top 10, but they're really power rated just inside the top 20 or top 25, depending on where you look. And I am a skeptic still because Illinois was in the 85th percentile on expected points added per play. That means they had one of the better expected points added per play performances in America so far, like across the year. But they got outgained in terms of the trenches. I thought Duke kind of beat them down pretty hard. But as the game progressed, Illinois outlasted them because of the turnovers. The fact that this game could have went totally differently if Duke just doesn't fumble at an insane, unlikely rate, I think would concern me if I believe Illinois is a top 10 team. Now, Tom Fornelli, Illinois fan, CBS analyst, I love listening to him usually. He said that Illinois' game plan was they knew Mensa put the ball in harm's way, so those turnovers weren't flukes. I disagree with that. Now, the one fumble he had, probably not flukish. The one pick he threw, that was a wonderful, wonderful play by Tanner Heckel, backup nickelback, number 16. Wonderful interception, totally baited him. Those three fumbles, the muffed punt and the strips on the wide receivers, those are not normal. And if they are normal, they're normal for Duke. They're not normal for a football. They're not normal for the average college football team. So I think that Illinois is a titch overvalued here. I'm just going to come out and say that. They are a titch overvalued. Just straight up. Duke, I definitely overvalued them. And I wonder how they're going to rebound. Because, look, I still think Illinois is overvalued by the public, but I also clearly undervalued them. Or maybe not clearly, but in terms of winning this game, I did. Duke, meanwhile, where do they go from here? Because if this is who you are, and you're taking penalties, you're missing some assignments, you are who you are in man coverage, and you lose the turnover battle, well, who on your schedule are you exactly safe from? No one. So I have concerns for both of these teams. It's a little bit opposite of my takeaway, just a little bit opposite of my takeaway from Iowa State and Iowa, where I thought that after that game I was impressed with both teams more than when I entered. In this game, I was more impressed with Illinois than when I entered, less impressed with Duke, but overall, I'm solidly in the camp of both of these teams have their issues. That's for sure. Illinois is more disciplined, though. That's for sure. They won the turnover battle. They were better on third and fourth down. Illinois had more total penalties, but fewer penalty yards, fewer personal fouls, didn't have a dumb face mask call that Duke had. They're the more disciplined team. They deserved to win, straight up. I mean, if these teams were to play a 10-game series neutral field, I'd probably now pick Illinois to win 6 out of 4. 5 out of 5, or 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10, maybe 7 out of 10. Would lean Illinois there, mostly just because of how disciplined the Illini look. And they do have an experience edge, and I also know, based on Bielema, they are disciplined. Now, something in relationship to both of these teams as well is both of their quarterbacks impressed me. Mensa and Altmaier are studs. They averaged over 9 yards per attempt each, layered their throws, looked absolutely beautiful. Altmaier was a stud on the ground. He had positive rushing yards despite taking 4 sacks. Most of those weren't his fault, by the way. His offensive line just kind of caved in to Vincent Anthony Jr. Nearly said Vincent Davis for some reason. Don't know why. Vincent Anthony Jr., Aaron Hall, Kendall Johnson. They were there, man. And they were mean. Honestly, honest to goodness, it kind of reminded me of Diaz's defensive performances against Ohio State, where you're getting pressure, your opponent can't run on you, but in coverage, yeah, good receivers and good QBs are going to get you. That's kind of what this game reminded me of, if I'm being honest. And Altmaier is a good enough QB, very impressive quarterback. I was already high on Altmaier. I think I had him as a preseason top 15, top 20 quarterback, which is better than his 2024 QBR would suggest. And his QBR right now on the season is 11th with an 87. No interceptions, starting the year exactly as he did last year when he didn't turn over the football. Already has over 500 passing yards. And Mensa is a physical specimen, very talented, nearly average 10 yards per attempt. I think as he just gets more adjusted to a speedier, more physical game going from the American, I believe, to the ACC, he'll get better. Now, Duke dominated the lines of scrimmage. Overall, at the end, I think they just won, but early on, they dominated. Illinois should run the ball better than Duke based on the backs they have. Fagan, Valentine, Lowry, Altmaier, I think, is more mobile than Mensa. Duke has Jacquez Moore, who's good, but really outside of him, they don't have the same depth at running back or QB. And Illinois returned more on the offensive line. And yet, Duke, when you look at sack-adjusted yards per attempt, same with Illinois, they averaged both 4. And a lot of those yards from Illinois came later in the game when Duke's defense was just on the field all day. So that plus the 10 TFLs that Duke had and the 4 sacks, look, Duke may have a better defensive front than USC. They might. But I don't think they do. And they certainly don't have a better defensive front overall than Indiana or Ohio State does. They don't. So how are you going to handle those teams if your offensive line looked this way, especially early? And I think that, Diaz is kind of the de facto DC for Duke. Being that and the head coach is very challenging. You're also going to be facing defensive coordinators who are going to be solely focused on their side of the ball and not split. So you're going to have more dedicated to you, against you, and you'll be facing more talented defenses. So that's kind of a concern that I have for Illinois moving forward. For Duke moving forward, it's turnovers, penalties. That's going to be rough, especially since both of these teams won a bunch of close games last year, so regression to the mean says their records will be worse. Illinois, meanwhile, they wrecked Duke's man coverage. Killed it. Diaz's man coverage got cooked in the second half. Whether it was Hank Beatty, whether it was Altmaier keeping it on one of the final runs that he had, whether it was Justin Bowick, Hudson Clement, Colin Dixon, they won. They were finding, whether it was holes in the zone occasionally or running some really impressive routes and just straight up beating Duke's DBs. And look, they have really good defensive backs. I mean, they have Chandler Rivers. Chandler Rivers is a great defensive back for Duke. Great corner. They have Terry Moore. I mean, this is a good Duke defense. It's a good defense. And Illinois was able to out-coach it, out-scheme it, and that was impressive, if I'm being honest. I do have concerns for both of these teams, though. I don't think either at this point is winning 9 games like they did last year. If one is, it's probably going to be Illinois because they won the head-to-head here, but Illinois also has a tougher schedule, in my opinion, than Duke does. Wow, I don't know what was going on there, but my apologies. I had a really, really bad itch. Don't know what that was about. Don't know whatsoever. But it's time for our commercial break. So that's actually a perfect segment. It's time for a commercial break. A little bit of a longer commercial, but there is some college football content baked into it. I decided to bring on the founder of a college football fantasy app. Oh, great. I decided to not edit the new, for whatever reason, I didn't change the new show times. For this little piece right here, but that's okay. This isn't like a segment we're going to release. Anyway, I brought on the founder of Squad Blitz, a college football fantasy app, to talk about the app, talk about some of his thoughts on college football, and I encourage you to join it. I have 2 leagues right now. I got to be honest, I haven't been paying a ton of attention to them, but it's a fun game. I check in here and there, and they have some features that allow you to play week to week. So in a fantasy league, if you're not doing well, usually you just have to suck it up and that's it. But in this one, they have week to week challenges where you can build your own squad with limited amounts of points. And if you find the correct teams to put together, if you do, then you can win. You can win weekly challenges. It's a really fun application. I always enjoyed going through the draft process. You get to pick different teams. So you can pick Michigan, Ohio State. You typically can't pick that many teams that would be listed high or commonly picked at once because there's, a draft. But you pick different teams and you assign different teams to different roles, like rushing offense, passing offense, and defense. You get to assign different teams to different roles. So sign up via the link in the pinned comment right now. Sign up for Squad Blitz via that link that I just posted right in there. And also the link in the description. I'm going to put that there right now. It's free, doesn't cost anything. You can create your own league and invite others to join. It's a really fun fantasy football platform. Sign up right now at squadblitz.com. Again, squadblitz.com. You can refer me in the sign-up section, and that will help me to get paid, and that will be a great way to support me. So again, sign up at squadblitz.com. I am going to let this ad break play for you all. Again, sign up, squadblitz.com. Link is pinned in the live chat, also in the description. I'm going to let this advertisement play where we talk about the app. We also talk a little bit of college football towards the end. We recorded this just before week 1, but it's early enough to where many of our thoughts are still pretty relevant. So just sit back, relax, and I will be right back here pretty soon. Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's College Football with Sam, and I thought that it would be best for you all that I would bring on the co-founder of Squad Blitz to explain what the app is and also to give you some more insights into it, its mission, talk about why I like it, and the co-founder of Squad Blitz, Corey Radmaker, is here with us. I thought that he would do the best job out of anyone to explain what this app is. So why don't you take it away, and how are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Sam. Appreciate it. It's a pleasure speaking to you and your college football fan base and kind of discuss the app a little bit. You want me to just kind of get into it, kind of explain it briefly real quick to start out? Yeah. So Squad Blitz is basically, so I'm in the southeast part of the country, and a lot of the country, especially southeast, but a lot of other parts of the country as well, we've noticed just love college football, and NFL is great, but to some people, the NFL practically doesn't even exist, and they just are passionate about college football. So that's what this app is for. It's for people like that, that they want to get into fantasy football, but fantasy football for college is pretty tough if you're going to go at the player level. So the main thing that sets apart this app for Squad Blitz is you're drafting teams instead of players. So in a nutshell, you're drafting 8 teams to make up your squad. Your starting lineup consists of 2 passing teams, 2 rushing teams, and 2 defensive teams. So for a rushing team, for example, like Michigan is generally a pretty good ground game. Of course, we'll see if that's the case this year. Yeah. That's a team you're going to want to put in the rushing slot. Whereas Ohio State, and I'm honestly not purposely trying to bring up that rivalry of those two schools, but they generally have a good passing attack, or like Oregon, they're throwing the ball over the place. So those are schools you'd put in the passing slot. And so you're not getting just stats for a player. It's that entire offensive unit for the passing stats or their rushing stats that you get credit for. So it's really makes it easy for the passive fan to get into. They don't have to be crazy college football fanatics like you and I to get involved. But if you are, that makes it even more fun. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And what a lot of people what they'll learn soon is that drafting the big powerhouses is not necessarily, they have their place, of course, they're going to be highly drafted, but there's niche schools that are just do nothing but run the ball and can't throw the ball for 5 yards, like the military schools, the Navies, Armies, Air Forces. So they have their place too. There's a lot of smaller schools like Western Kentucky. They throw the ball well, and their schedule's not nearly as hard as a Big Ten or SEC schedule. So there's a lot of dynamic to the app, and as far as that goes, there's matchup plays in NFL fantasy. Same thing with the team base as well.
Yeah, that's what I love about it is you, on one hand, you don't have to know all the different players to get involved and to have success and to win. But on another hand, you could also say that knowing all these different players can be really helpful, and knowing the different schedules and dynamics of the team, so you can take advantage of, like you said, Western Kentucky throwing it everywhere, the service academies running it all the time. Or maybe you can think of a school that has a lot of good players from your perspective that no one else is talking about, and you draft them and see how they do in any of the categories: rushing, passing, defense. How about you tell everyone about the new feature of Squad Blitz that is coming this season, and that allows people to be involved for different parts of the season, so they don't have to sign up now or participate for the whole year, but the new weekly blitz that you've released or are working on?
Yeah. So first, with the traditional league, you actually can start 2, 3, 4 weeks into the league, and it's not ideal though. To be honest, we had some leagues start like halfway through the season. Then your league is only like at that point 6, 7 weeks long, so it's not ideal, but you can do it. But the new part of the app that came out is just a weekly contest. It's just a clean slate every single week. It's an app-wide contest, which I think is pretty cool because now, as a lot of people, anybody who's playing fantasy football has been in the league where first 2, 3 weeks, some guys are just losing badly, and they kind of check out mentally. And it's kind of frustrating for the rest of the guys in the league because they're still in it, but they're not even trying, So,
exactly.
It becomes stigmatized, kind of fizzles out. With the weekly contest that Squad Blitz has, it's a clean slate every week. In a nutshell, again, you have 1,000 Blitz bucks is what we're calling them. You have $1,000 to go pick a team. 5 teams. In this case, it's two passing teams, 2 rushing teams, and then just 1 defensive team. And which, for what it's worth, for me, the defensive side of the ball, I don't really put a ton of stock. This is my personal strategy. I'm just looking at the matchups. I'm looking to see what team is playing the most incompetent offense is based on my strategy there. But with this weekly contest, you have those 1,000 Squad Blitz bucks, and you compile your roster. However, you have all the teams out there, you compile it. Of course, you got to stay in that budget, though. You obviously can't take just the best matchups in every single slot. You're going to go through that $1,000 way too quick. And then your stats get compiled, and you're stacked up against the entire app user base to see where you add up. And so, like I said, it's kind of fun because you can just completely bomb it one week and do it again another week and get as many guys as you want to play. So you don't have to be fully committed every single week. So it's a pretty cool aspect that's been added this year.
That does sound really fun. I'm going to try that out for sure, because last season when I also used the app, created a league with my base, and now we have 2 leagues, hoping to get some more. So for those of you watching this advertisement right now, you can click the link in the live show description or any of my video descriptions and sign up for Squad Blitz. I will have that link there for probably the entire season, because even if it is later in the year, just getting new users to an app that I love, that I think is really fun, is awesome. So make sure to click the link in the description to sign up for Squad Blitz. It'll just take you right to the website where you can install it for Android or iOS. I'll make sure to try out that weekly blitz thing. That sounds really fun, especially as the season goes on, and my opinions and others' opinions about these different teams is going to radically change as we get, well, games played, and we see these players go up against each other, and it's not just in our heads, we can physically see it, it's tangible. So speaking of that, before we let you go, are there any brief thoughts you have on football this year? Any teams that you really like? Let's make it fun and say any teams you like for squad blitz to have a ton of success, and just a team or a few teams you really love in general this year.
In general, well, as far as on squad blitz goes, I admit I probably overdraft the rushing schools, the Navies, the Air Forces. But it's worked out pretty well for me so far. So I'm not saying they're a first-round pick, but they're a pretty high pick, though, just because they're just going to accumulate so much rushing yardage. Now, they're not versatile like the Georgias, Alabamas, to where they're solid all around, because you can only put them in that one slot. Exactly. But for me, those schools, they 9 times out of 10, they're throwing in a lot of points on the board on the rushing side. Oregon and Texas, I think, are going to put a lot of points on the board. I said that about Ohio State as well last year. Through the air, they actually kind of underwhelmed a little bit. Obviously, they won the Natty, but as far as stats purposes go, didn't do as strong as what a lot of guys in squad blitz kind of anticipated. As far as outside of the app side, just football in general, I think week 1, Ohio State and Texas, that's going to be pretty fun to watch. A lot of people are, from what I've heard lately, thinking that Texas might run away with it. I find that hard to believe, to be honest. But what I think is really cool, too, is I'm not sure when this has happened, if it's happened, but a week 1 game having a repeat in the championship, that's not that far-fetched. I know we got a whole season to go through, but regardless of what happens in the week 1 between Ohio State and Texas, it'd be pretty cool to see them face off again. Maybe not the same trip, but sometime in the playoffs. So it's going to be a fun season. And to see the SEC, there's a lot of parity there where there hasn't been in the past. So who knows what's going to come out of that conference. And it's going to be a blast regardless.
It is going to be an absolute blast. I think that Texas-Ohio State is going to be a very close and competitive game. Can't wait to see how that one rolls around, how that goes, and who wins. I picked Ohio State, but I do think that Texas is the better team and should win. So I'm thinking it's going to be very competitive, very back and forth. And I do agree for different reasons that Oregon and Texas will put up a lot of points this year. Texas, I'm more so looking at that defense, though the offense should be pretty dynamic. And I think as Oregon learns about each other with how young that team is, but also how talented, and the schedule has a lot of opportunities, tough travel slate, but not a lot of tough games outside of that Penn State matchup and maybe USC. I like what Oregon can do offensively. So thank you for joining us and telling us about this app. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about?
Nothing other than keep the feedback coming. What's made this app so awesome so far is because the founders of this app we've kept our ear to the ground, got involved in all the leagues to listen. What's working, what's not working, what do you guys want to see added? We're not some huge corporation that just is running this without that in mind. So we've got a Discord channel. Keep in touch with us on all our socials. Let us know what's working, what you like, what you don't like. We'll make the adjustments.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. And that's a big part of the reason why I'm proud to be sponsored by you guys, is because of the feedback that you were willing to accept and the great app that you've created. Now, on to the next segment. And welcome back, everyone. Thank you for listening to that advertisement. And sign up to join Squad Blitz today. It's a really, really fun, interesting, good application. And you know what the beauty of this application is? The real beauty of it, pardon me there, I had a little bit of a snack and had a little bit of a snack and some water while going down. But they accept user feedback, which is incredible. So if you have any issues with the app, if you have anything that you want to complain about, any ideas to improve it, well, you can always contact them, and they'll try their best to resolve any issues you have. Okay, this is bad. So conveniently, this is why I should be running OBS on one computer and have another computer with all the different information. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on here, but gosh, is there any way that I can... I can't open up my tab. I can't do it for whatever reason. So I don't know how I'm going to fix that. Because I know all of you are watching, and this is kind of upsetting because we got through so much of this, but we still have so much more to get through. This stream's probably going to go on for another hour, and I can't get out of here. I can't get out of here. This is frustrating. Like, I'm literally stuck in OBS because my Windows key won't work. If any of you have any suggestions in the live chat, send them in, and I'll use my phone to be able to navigate to the chat. See, we still have a good amount of concurrent viewers here, so hopefully someone can help me. Hopefully. Don't know if anyone can, but to any of you who are listening, please, by all means, yeah, Don, I'm trying to get to your Spartan breakdown, but until I can escape, yeah, I don't know what's going on. Because usually it's the Windows key. That's how I exit all of this. But for whatever reason... Oh, Alt plus Tab. Oh my gosh. You're going to save my life if this works. Holy cow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. You're a lifesaver. For whatever reason, the Windows key's broken. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, it's busted. And... that's something I'm going to have to resolve immediately once we get on out of here. But Alt plus Tab, I will keep that in my mind. In fact, I'm going to write it down. It's a nifty backup option because I'm going to need to, continue to exit out of these things. That's what I'm going to need to do, of course. So now we're going to talk about, this is going to take getting used to, but I'll figure out a way for it. We're going to talk about Clemson now. And we're talking about Clemson here because they're a team I want to cover, but I've just been so shocked at how bad they have looked. I had this team going undefeated because they brought everyone back, and they have NFL players, and their schedule is not hard. I mean, I'm not convinced, guys, that LSU is a top 5 team. I don't think they are. I'm not even entirely convinced they're top 10. I think that this is from a Big Ten perspective, so keep this in mind. I think I'm not going to say right now, because there just isn't enough of a sample size. It's better right now if you're talking about power rating a team right now. It's probably better to project forward a few weeks or to just go with your preseason because we're just so early. Unless the team you're ranking has played in a big game, then you can adjust. But I am not sure that LSU is better than USC. Not sure about that. And I'm not sure if they're better than Indiana, Big Ten wise. I know that they are better, or I know that they are worse than Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. There's no way either of those teams are better than LSU, are worse than LSU. They're definitely better. There's no way they're worse. SEC wise, Georgia, I think, is definitely better than them. I think Texas is definitely better than them. Alabama, we'll have to see. I think that FPI will always be overrating Alabama because of their talent and history. So I'd leave that alone. I'd probably put LSU ahead of Alabama. But we'll have to see about that. And ACC-wise, I think Miami's better than LSU. Maybe I'm wrong there, though. A lot is very early. A ton is very early. So just keep all of that in mind. But Clemson has been concerning to me, and I want to tell you why they have been concerning to me. A lot of it has to do with really their offensive line and quarterback play. I expected the ground game to struggle, but not struggle to this degree. So Clemson escapes Troy by a score of 27-16. At one point, it was 16-0. And Clemson had one of the worst first half performances I have seen so far in the 2025 season. It was so bad. So awful. When I watch Clemson through 8 quarters of college football, I see a team that is not well coached on offense or game management. Now, I think personally that defensively they're well coached, so we're not going to chalk that up. But another issue they have is there are some shaky players on defense. I don't think this defense is at Penn State, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas level. I just don't. I think it's in that next tier. We'll see. But right now I would take Jim Knowles in Penn State. I would take Patricia in Ohio State. Certainly Smart and Schumann in Georgia. And Kwiatkowski in Texas right now over Allen and Clemson defensively. Again, they look awesome, and I think Allen's done a better job than I expected at fixing their issues, but they are not perfect. I mean, there were some plays where their DBs, we're talking about Avion Terrell, we're talking about Khalil Barnes, we're talking about Ashton Hampton, Jaden Lucas, where they gave up some pass attempts that you do not want to give up against Troy. And those running backs were taking some angles that I just didn't, or linebackers rather. Those linebackers, and even the running backs too. I think that Clemson has some in-the-box play that is a little bit questionable, if I'm being honest. And by in-the-box, I mean inside the tackle box. So that can be your safeties, that can be your linebackers, running back. It can even be D-line, but I think Clemson's fine on the D-line. I thought that Troy's number 9, their quarterback, Goose Crowder, played well, and he did a good job of getting the ball over some of Clemson's defensive backs. He ended up with 3 interceptions, and Clemson won 27-16. They scored 27 unanswered points. 27 unanswered points. I mean, they dominated that second half. They looked really, really, really good, honestly, in that second half. But it took them a while to get there. It took them a while. And that is what the concerning piece was. Because if you're Clemson, you should be beating Troy by 40 or 50 points. Maybe by 30 or even upper 20s, but never, ever having a doubt that you're going to beat them. To be down 16-3 at half is, I think, a clear indication that there are some issues. Now, in relationship to winning the ACC, I think Clemson's just fine. Because I think as we've seen, the ACC is, you have Florida State, you have Miami. They have so far overshot their preseason expectations. Clemson's very much undersold their preseason expectations. But it is early. Clemson still has a more talented roster than either of those by recruiting rankings. And once you factor in development, I would say it's probably better than Florida State's at this point. Miami's, no, but we'll have to see. It's kind of a very early takeaway I have that I'm going to go with, is that I believe Miami has probably the better overall roster. Starting roster, I'd still go with Clemson, though. In relationship to winning the national title, just kind of leave those hopes at the door. I mean, Clemson started the year plus, I think, low plus 1,000 in odds to win it all. They've now dropped below plus 2,000. Is there a chance they can win it all with the chaos here that has transpired? Maybe so. But these early performances have not inspired confidence. Now, there are Clemson teams who've won it all under Swinney that did not perform well early against bad competition. 2016, 2018, even the 2019-17 teams and 15 teams that all of them reached the playoff, and the 20 team had some off games. Everyone has some off games, but to be 2 games into the year and your only samples are games where you are underperforming, that is not something that inspires confidence. Clemson clearly has issues among the offensive line. Very clearly. So the defense is legit, and we've talked about this. And wide receiver, even with Antonio Williams out, TJ Moore is good. Bryant Wesco looks like a freak. I love him on the field. But Clemson right now is averaging 75.5 run yards per game and 3 yards per carry overall. And they're giving up sacks. They didn't just give up sacks to LSU and gave up constant pressures with missed assignments. Troy was getting pressure on them throughout the game. That is not something that inspires confidence. It's not. What about that inspires confidence? Running back is not perfect. Tight end is not perfect. Cade Klubnik, Dabo Swinney's now criticized him 2 games in a row, or said he's not played well in the post-game press conference, so he's a little bit rattled. And I don't think Garrett Riley's calling a good game. The offense outside of wide receiver is lost. It just straight up is. There's no way around that. No way around that. Wide receiver is, look, it's a very good unit. It's one of the best units in America at receiver when Antonio Williams is healthy. But Adam Randall, number 8, he had that one play where it was a 4th down, and if he holds on to that ball early in the first quarter, it'd be an obvious Clemson win entering the half. Troy would never have had the momentum to build up enough steam to where people doubted Clemson's capacity to win. Clemson would have led at the half. I know Clemson was rotating in the offensive line in the second quarter and throughout this game. Like, they had a true freshman, Braden Jacobs, in, and he gave up a very critical sack. But it's Troy. Talent alone, with your coaching and Dabo Swinney's reputation, you should be handling these teams pretty easily. I will say that throughout the game, the defense took over. Ashton Hampton had a beautiful interception. Ronan Hannafin, strong safety, who is surprisingly starting. He had a good pick. Overall, it's just a disappointing performance for Clemson. I mean, when at one point in the game, Troy is given a near 75% chance to win, that's not good. That's kind of an indictment right there. When you outgain Troy 316 to 301, and you have 2 turnovers, you only have 1 more first down than they do, and they had 67 additional yards in penalties that they gifted you. When you are 5 of 12 on 3rd down and they are 5 and 13, when they have a 6-minute possession advantage over you, and when you look at the advanced analytics with the Tigers, and it's clear their offense has issues, guys. It's very clear. It's very obvious. According to GameOnPaper.com, Clemson had a negative expected points added per play, negative 0.10, negative 1/10 expected points added per play. Their expected points added per rush was a negative 0.30. They can't run the football. They can't do it. And Garrett Riley, I know he's received a ton of criticism, but what was his TCU offense really good at in 2022? Which that performance ultimately got him the Clemson job. They could run the ball, and they could run it very well. On top of it, they had a gutsy QB, and they had wonderful receivers who could attack downfield. Every single season at Clemson with Garrett Riley, they've had one component of their offense that could mesh well with his concepts. Last year and the year before that, it was Phil Maffa. This year, they finally have and late last year, they had the receivers and ground attack. If Maffa were healthy against Texas, there's a chance that's a game in the fourth quarter. And by a game, I mean a real game where it's tied or Clemson isn't just trying to stage a comeback attempt, but it's really back and forth. There would have been a chance with that. But this year, there is no ground game to be found. It's all downfield receivers. And I know that Garrett Riley technically runs an air raid, but this, pardon me there, this is more of a, this is a power raid, a spread. It's an air raid with air raid concepts, air raid philosophy, but it's not the Mike Leach, we're not really going to use our running backs all that much air raid. This offense is predicated on running the ball very much so. It's similar to Lincoln Riley's offense where, yeah, it's called an air raid, but their offense is at their best when they run more, when they pass, and when they have a lot of success on the ground. When they don't, that's when things look bad. I ultimately still like Clemson in the ACC. I will be releasing updated college football playoff predictions sometime this week. I might have Clemson in still. But as a national title contender, at least as of right now, I am out on the Tigers there. You just can't look like that. You can't in your first 2 weeks, especially against an LSU team that right now is not top 3 or top 4 in title odds, and then against a Troy team that, with all due respects, is a Sun Belt and G6 team for a reason. Now let's talk about Texas. There's a little bit of a long-winded segment on Clemson. We won't go that long for the rest of these segments, but look, I think that Clemson has issues. I think those issues deserve to get talked about, and it doesn't look good. It really doesn't look good at all from what I've seen with Clemson and the offense that they are running. It also, if I'm being honest, it doesn't look good with Texas either, but Texas is not nearly in the same predicament, not nearly in that exact same predicament as Clemson is. Texas beat San Jose State with a C-tier game. 38-7 was the final score in a game where I thought that Arch Manning actually struggled a bit there. Manning had some wonderful throws, hit Parker Livingston and Jack Endries for some wonderful touchdowns, made a wonderful touch pass to the sidelines for DeAndre Moore Jr. that Moore was able to, fully extend and reach out and catch the ball, bring it into his chest. But he also had some throws where, he gets hit as he's throwing, and he throws an interception with under a minute left in the half, and it's kind of like, what are you doing, man? Like, get the ball out quicker. Or some other throws where, for the first 2 drives against San Jose State, he's dirting balls, similar to how he was against Ohio State. Not quite as bad, even factoring in the fact that he's facing a weaker defense. He was more accurate in this game, irrespective of that. But still, there were some concerns from this game. There were also some positives, but I want to start with the negatives, finish with the positives. We save the best for last, or at least I like to, depending on the topic, and I think this is very important. So, Manning, there's this discourse about his shoulder being hurt, and Sarkisian gave a very non-answer in the press conference. I'm not going to assume that his shoulder is being hurt. I'm not going to do that. Because we've seen with Quinn Ewers, and to be fair, they got him back as soon as they could, but they also let him sit against inferior competition. They have UTEP and Sam Houston coming up. Texas does. And I think they have a bye sandwiched somewhere in between there, though maybe it's later in the year. If Manning's shoulder was really that bad, They could rest him and win all of those games. They just could. And why can they? Because of Cole Hudson, CJ Baxter, Trevor Gooseby, Endries, Livingston, Wingo, DeAndre Moore Jr., because of Murad Watson, Cole Brevard, Colin Simmons, Anthony Hill Jr. I can go on and on and on. This roster is insanely impressive. People complaining that this team is rated too high in FPI don't know how power ratings work. They don't. Like, neutral field tomorrow, Texas is favored over Ohio State. That's reality. They are favored over most teams in the country neutral field, even most teams if they played them on the road. Texas is that good. They're that respected by the books. They're that respected by me. They're a really good team. In fact, the polls are underrating them by having them at 7th. They are. But Manning, he has some things to work through. So you have the mobility. You have the arm strength. You have the deep ball accuracy. You do. But what you don't have the ability to throw and successfully, consistently throw the intermediate and short ball. His improvised running makes him look like a running back. Like that is how skilled he is there and talented. But his accuracy is pretty hit and miss, and that's a concern right there. A takeaway I had is I thought Parker Livingston has solidified himself as probably wide receiver 1. Not saying he's more talented than Wingo or Moore, but Wingo and Moore are being paid more attention to by opposing defenses, and that gives Livingston the opportunity to get open. And Livingston had that touchdown grab against Ohio State. He had 2 touchdown grabs against San Jose State, where, look, he racked up under 28 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. He averaged 32 yards per reception. And Endries is also being given opportunities. So that is something to consider here with the Longhorns, is that they may have found a wide receiver 1, or at least a competent wide receiver that they didn't exactly expect to emerge and play this well. But they did, and that's something to consider, and that's something to keep in mind. I think that the defensive line has nearly reloaded for Texas. I think that D-tackle especially is an area that I love for the Longhorns. You know, Murad Watson had one play where, and this is where Texas forced a San Jose interception. He blows up the middle of that O-line immediately and pressures San Jose State's quarterback, forces him to roll out. He throws an interception. These defensive tackles are really, it's an elite room. And they may have a singular or maybe even 2 elite D tackles by themselves. I don't know about that yet, but the depth and quality and athleticism they have is paramount, probably second to none in that room outside of maybe Clemson or Penn State, maybe Georgia. I think that linebacker with Anthony Hill Jr., Trey Moore, you got one of the second string linebackers for Texas involved in the game pretty early. Ty Anthony Smith forcing a fumble. I think that all things considered, even with the turnovers, San Jose State's a pretty well-coached team. They just made some mistakes because it's a big moment for them, and Texas's defense is one of the best, if not maybe the best defense in all of America. The offensive line's another unit that I think may have reloaded. Pass blocking, they do not have the same ceiling. In general, they probably don't have the same ceiling because Kelvin Banks is that good. But in run blocking, I like this unit a ton. Pass protection needs time, though. They're still missing some assignments, still having some issues there, but I think with time it will get better. It's interesting with the run blocking. They ran for a similar yards per carry and in similar fashion against San Jose State as they did against Ohio State. I still think their run blocking is better, but this was not a game that exactly inspired confidence in Texas's ability to maul people on the ground. It's still not a 2023 Texas ground attack. It's not quite that good. But again, Texas beat San Jose State with a C-tier game. They struggled in aspects, but they won. And the last thing to touch on is I love their light box defense. I love it. They can do anything with that formation, that 4-2-5 they run, where they run a light box, typically only putting 4 or 5 or 6 people in there, and they can just eat up any offensive line and prevent you from running the ball, get some pressure on you, all while covering your receivers downfield. It's a wonderful defense. So long term, I think Texas is fine. I'd still like their odds to win it all and to win the SEC. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But this is a good team with just some kinks to work out. Moving on, we'll talk about Oregon blowing out Oklahoma State. That's what is up next on the table. Man, we've already been live for 2 hours. That's pretty crazy. 2 hours, but we are oh so close to being done. Let me see what people are saying in the chat. Any super chats? No. Someone did mention USC's ceiling, though. Trying to find that comment before I move on. USC ceiling is very high. How good are they? No idea, but they've shown me enough to know they're pretty dang good. Agreed. Colby Vlatch. We'll talk about USC here for a few minutes in just a bit. And again, I might push this stream back to 10 because this the stream's going on longer than I expected, but we will be going live for probably an hour, maybe a little bit more than that, to talk about some of the big games for this coming week for 10-15 minutes each. So Georgia Tennessee for sure, Oregon Northwestern absolutely. That's probably the Big Ten's biggest game. USC Purdue, we'll see. We'll see on Clemson, Georgia Tech, Notre Dame A&M, LSU Florida. At least one of those games in addition to Oregon, Northwestern, and the biggest game of the week, Tennessee Georgia, will be talked about. At least one. But we'll see. So make sure you hit the notification bell and subscribe to the channel and like the stream so that you can get notified when we go live, and so that stream can show up in your algorithm and other channel feeds. Let's talk about Oregon, though. Is Oregon the best team in the Big Ten? Perhaps the best team in America? Well, after they thumped Oklahoma State 69-3, ESPN's FPI thinks this is the best team in America. A lot of the public is reacting to this game and saying they really love Oregon. I mean, they were favored by 27.5 points, and Oregon covered that spread pretty effortlessly. This is a game that I called pretty perfectly. I thought it was pretty obvious from the jump with Gundy's comments, with how Lanning responded to them, and with how Oregon played against Montana State, that Oregon would come out here and they would want to send a message that they would start fast and not slow down. And Oklahoma State, I thought it was kind of obvious with Hedgney being injured and the Pokies, the Cowboys, only beating UT Martin by 20 points, that they were not a good football team. To not be a good football team, to get Oregon angry, and then to travel to what is a hornet's nest of a stadium in Autzen is pure idiocy. Pure idiocy. I will honestly come out and say right now, even more so than Billy Napier being an absolute idiot and losing that USF game, Gundy's done. I don't quite know if Napier's done yet. I'm pretty close to saying he is, but I'm not going to go there yet. Gundy's done. Done. You cannot recover from that. It'd be one thing if they had Hedgney and got him back pretty quickly. I have no idea how you right the ship. I have no idea how you talk the way you do, which sounds like whining, pompous whining, and lose this way and regain control. No idea how you do that. Oregon could have made this final score 100-0. 100-0. If they wanted to. They didn't. They called off the Dogs eventually. But they could have made it 100-0 pretty effortlessly if they wanted. Look, Oregon didn't win the TOP battle. They didn't. And they only had one more play, and yet they won by 66. Huge part of that's because Oklahoma State, they had 67 passing yards for 3.5 yards per attempt. They couldn't pass the football. Meanwhile, Oregon averaged 12.8 yards per pass attempt and 8.4 yards per rush attempt. Oregon more than doubled Oklahoma State's pass yards per attempt on the ground. That's insane. Crazy stuff that the Ducks did this past Saturday. Oklahoma State took 2 sacks. They had no power rushing success rate. Oregon is at a 25% power rushing success rate, but I know that Oklahoma State has at least a competent defensive front, an okay defensive front, and ultimately when you're running so successfully down your opponent's throat with big carries, if you're doing that consistently, then having that low of a power rushing success rate I do not think is a major concern, personally. Oregon, look, missed a 4th down. You correct that. Could have won by more. They were 7 of 12 on 3rd down. Oklahoma State was 0 of 1 on 4th down and 4 of 16 on 3rd down. It was a pretty impressive performance by Lanning and his Ducks. I mean, I loved what I saw out of, if I'm being honest, like all of their players. I loved it. The energy they brought. I can tell Noah Whittington is healthy. There's this one block where Emmanuel Pregnon, Iapani Lololu, Dave Uli, the interior, they just blocked so well and really parted this Red Sea for Whittington to just scamper through for a touchdown. Brycen Moore is truly a freak athlete. I said in the preseason he'd get 1,000 receiving yards in the regular season, or at least on this, I forget if it was regular season or season overall that he'd get 1,000 and 10 or more receiving touchdowns. He looked awesome against Oklahoma State. Kenyon Sadiq did too. And Kenyon Sadiq was blocking well. I mean, physically, throwing guys 10 yards back. And I'm telling you, this Ducks team, I said it in the preseason, and I was not someone who thought Oregon should have been a national title favorite, but I said that people were overlooking Oregon. I said that. You can check on several videos. Oregon was probably one of, if not perhaps the most underestimated team in the preseason. And they're coming through, and they're playing with their hair on fire. They really are. I mean, they have some things to work out. They're not this perfect team. Like, special teams wasn't all that good in this matchup. They missed a field goal, averaged fewer than 40 yards per punt attempt. They only had 4 TFLs against a pretty bad Oklahoma State offensive line, but they performed well overall. I mean, when you win 69-3, there is not much to complain about here. And Brycen Moore, he had 69 receiving yards for a touchdown. Malik Benson, transfer from Florida State, has been developed rather phenomenally. Gary Bryant Jr. had a receiving touchdown. Jeremiah McClellan, redshirt freshman wide receiver for the Ducks, he had 76 receiving yards in this game. And we know Sadiq is a freak. Jamari Johnson had things to show off. And Oregon had 12 different rushers. 12 of them. Whittington, Jaden Lamar, Mekhi Hughes. They showcased Jay Harris a bit there, running back. I mean, they're deep, they're talented, they're well coached, well developed. I mean, that defense ate up Oklahoma State. Ate them up. You had backups playing in this game, like Peyton Woodyard getting a pick 6, Jerry Mixon getting a pick 6. Those were backups, by the way. Kingston Lopa, backup. He had a really nice, hard-hitting tackle later in the matchup. There's just so much to love about this Oregon team, and that's why I wanted to highlight all of those different players. They blew out Oklahoma State like it was nothing. Absolutely nothing. However, I do want to finish out with some takeaways about each of these teams, and I want to be a little bit more measured in this segment. So, Mike Gundy, this is the part where I won't be measured. He's done. I don't really want to talk about Oklahoma State more than that. You can't show up that way, especially with how you looked in week 1 with your starting quarterback now dinged up. You can't do that. Can't do it, man. For Oregon, are they the number 1 team? Well, on that front, I don't exactly know. I don't. Oklahoma State's pretty bad, and Montana State's an FCS school. So even though analytically you look really good, Oregon has not played anyone who can compete with them or come close to competing with them roster-wise. I will say, I know for a fact Oregon's more athletic than they were in 2024. Dante Moore clearly is a stud. You average 12.8 yards per pass attempt, and you are throwing nice touch passes. Your throws are on time. Your throws are not behind, nor are they ahead of your wide receivers. You are a potential stud. An 86 QBR, 3 passing touchdowns. He was dropping throws in the breadbasket. Wonderful performance. Oregon, I will say that their offensive line, I think, is reloaded from last year. Tackle looks good. I think that their run blocking is good. In fact, I would say their run blocking is probably better, especially their interior run game. Inside offensive line, interior offensive line blocking, I think is better. When you return your center, some key contributing guards, and you get Emmanuel Pregnon, who was one of the better guards in football last year, to play for you, that stuff will happen. And they got really good tackles in the portal. This offense is clearly a much higher ceiling than last year's offense did. Defense probably has a higher ceiling too, just because of how they're recruiting there, and the fact that their defensive backs are taller, longer. They returned key NFL defensive ends, and their defensive tackle room is extremely talented. Even though they did lose a lot, I think they took a step back there. I do want to say, though, Oregon, when you look at opponent-adjusted yards per carry, or sack-adjusted yards per carry, a little bit too early for opponent-adjusted metrics. Relative performance, as college football nerds eloquently puts it, they kind of came up with that concept. Oregon allowed Oklahoma State to run for 4 yards per carry when you take out sacks. That's about the same amount that Oklahoma State ran on UT Martin in week 1. With Hengy, who is more of a mobile, athletic quarterback. Flores doesn't exactly have legs. I think that Oregon's run defense still has issues. I still think they do. When you look at the yards per carry that they've allowed, when you look at their run stuffing rate on defense, which was the only bad thing about this game when you look at advanced analytics, and the fact that last year, look, they had a better defensive line. Their DNs probably weren't as good, but Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell are better than Amari Washington, Bear Alexander, Aiden Breland, Tione Gray, I think. That D-tackle core last year was better. And Betcher's back from last year. They lost Jeffrey Bassa. So in theory, this defensive front should be worse. At the very best, I think it's the same. They gave up 10 yards per carry to a Penn State team who returned everyone in the O-line, all their running backs. Still have a great set of tight ends, even though they don't have a Tyler Warren. They returned their QB and upgraded at wide receiver. Ohio State's tackles look just as good as last year. Their guards look just as good as last year. I know that some have said, and probably accurately so, Montgomery looks better, but I still don't trust Hinsman and whoever they have at right guard, whether that's Onyanwa or Shabola, and their backs are clearly worse. But Ohio State, when their tackle didn't go down middle of the game, and especially Penn State, who's the best team in the Big Ten, I think by a mile at running the ball in terms of just straight up, we're going to force the run on you and you can't do anything to stop it. USC might be better schematically, but it's very early to tell. Riley's just a genius when it comes to scheming the run. Can you stop them? Can you stop those rushing attacks? And I don't know the answer to that right now, if I'm being honest. I think it's very early to tell. And that's where I'm going to say, throwing some caution at you guys, Oregon can be the number 1 team in CFB. They are that good. I've thought that way in the preseason, even when many said they didn't know or think that Oregon could win a title. I said, yeah, they can. Lanning's an elite coach with an elite staff, and they have the necessary talent. But these questions that we had in the preseason about them have not been answered yet, outside of maybe is quarterback play really good? And I always thought that Moore was at least going to be a Dylan Gabriel level quarterback. It just never made sense to really peg him below that. So some of the other questions outside of quarterback that I had as someone who's high on Moore, both Moores, Dante Moore and DeCorian Moore, I'm waiting to be answered. So pump the brakes a little bit and at the same time be really, really excited. I'm pumped to see Oregon take on Penn State in week 5. That's going to be a phenomenal game. could be the game of the year. We'll see how the Ducks do, but I'm very high on their future, very optimistic on what this team can do. As for Oklahoma State, you're dead, and that's very sad because I think there is a lot to Oklahoma State's program and more than most people realize. But that's a topic for another day. Big 12 football with Sam isn't exactly what we do on here. It's not. But we'll talk about them when I think it's appropriate, ultimately. Let's see what anyone is saying, if at all, in the chat. Yeah, people talking about, don't worry, everyone, we'll get to Michigan State. Michigan State's actually the last thing we're talking about. It's just how I watched film, and I organized this show based on the order of games I watched, and I watched Michigan State last. So hold on, pump the brakes. We'll get to Michigan State at the end of the show, and we actually have a decent amount more topics to get to before we get to the Spartans. So just hang on tight. No, it's been a long show, but we will get there. The Georgia Bulldogs beat Austin Peay 28-6 with a slow performance. Georgia beats Austin Peay, and they kind of sleepwalked through this one, didn't they? They were sleepwalking, and we all know that the weather delay, the rain delay, really didn't help with that cause. But with Georgia, some takeaways that I have, because that's really all we can talk about here. We're not going to talk about Austin Peay, and Georgia has some pretty big games coming up. The Bulldogs, I think, have somewhat, I'm going to be very careful here, I think they have somewhat fixed their power rushing. Is it as good as it's been in years before 2024? I don't think so. And I don't exactly know. But I think it's superior to the 2024 form. Just needs a lot of work. Branch, again, in this matchup looked pretty good, I thought. Number 9 linebacker Chris Cole had an impactful sack. Georgia's defensive line constantly got pressure. I think it's a better defense than what Georgia had last season. And I think looking at their physicality, their speed, the depth they have, even with some questions at depth, I think kind of proves it. They had some backup corners, DeMello Jones, number 15, number 1 Ellis Robinson, that they made some great plays. Jones had an impactful hit. Ellis Robinson had an interception, a diving interception. My only concern about this game, or maybe I should say concerns plural, are this offense's inconsistency, maybe, with running the ball, and the fact that Stockton is limited in talent. But we knew Stockton was limited in talent. Even the most optimistic Georgia person did. And I think that they will be able to run the ball better than last season, and I think that with some of the receiver upgrades they've made, the good defense, elite special teams, should be good enough. We have known that Stockton is limited. He doesn't quite have a special arm. He is super mobile, but he's not Lamar Jackson mobile. I think he's good enough in Mike Bobo's offense and with what Kirby Smart wants to do and the receivers he has, Colby Young, Zachariah Branch, Dylan Bell, London Humphreys, to where I think that he won't lose Georgia games, but he also may not win Georgia games. We'll see. Maybe he can grow into that quarterback, or maybe he's worse than I think. But keep in mind, we are 2 weeks in. It's a little bit early to have drastic takeaways for any team, I would say, unless they've dramatically underperformed expectations or overshot them. Georgia has done neither. Georgia looked really good against Marshall. Looked pretty mediocre here. I think they were bored in both games, right? It's very similar to Penn State. Penn State and Georgia right now are both playing with their food, waiting for tougher competition, and they are perfectly content with the entirety of college football thinking that Notre Dame can beat them, which is just insane if you watch week 1. I mean, we don't even know if Miami's defense is great. I don't know if Miami's offense is great. Is C.J. Carr seriously beating this defense right now? No, he's not. If Georgia decided to play to their full strength, and they can, like they're rotating guys, they're resting guys. Again, they're playing with their food. Notre Dame would not beat them. They don't have the coaching that Georgia does. They do not have the same brainiac duo of coordinators that they did last year. They don't. And Georgia's also not as banged up, not as defeated as they were last year. Say I'm a Notre Dame hater all you want. We're not talking about them here. We'll talk about them in a preview. Same with Georgia, as they play very impactful games this week. However, the point I'm trying to make there is Georgia is not an overvalued team. Georgia, I would say, along with Oregon in the preseason, was a very undervalued product and roster. And Oregon started out fast, so people are buying into them now. People are still selling on Georgia, and I don't really understand why. I mean, yes, is their ability to run the ball as dominant as it was in 22, 23, or 21? No, but it's better than last year. And their receivers are better, and I think consequentially their situation in terms of passing offense is better. I like this defense more, at least from what I've seen so far, and I also said that I thought this defense would be better in the preseason. You don't want to overreact to week 1, week 2 results. I'm really not. I'm kind of sticking with a lot of my preseason stuff, especially if I see some reasons early in these weeks that kind of confirm what I thought was the case. Not saying that means it's right. Sample size is very small, but I'm pretty high on Georgia still. I think they're a bored team. I think that they are just trying to get Stockton reps. They're trying to get this offense gelled together. They're trying to assess their options on all sides of the football. I think you're going to see whether or not Georgia beats Tennessee or not, and they've had Tennessee's number. I think you're going to see a different, better version of Georgia when they come out and they play Tennessee on the road in Neyland in week 3. I think you're going to see a different version of Georgia. Georgia is this team who against Kent State in 2022 only beat them by 17 points. Only. Final score, I think, was like 39-22. Only beat them by 17. They beat Austin Peay by 22. That Georgia team won a natty. They went 15-0. And they're probably better than this team, or at least as of right now, almost any team in college football, because of how the transfer portal and recruiting and staff changes have impacted everyone, especially the schools at the top, in terms of their ability to retain talent and build, all conference depth throughout even their second and occasionally third string, like Saban used to do. So don't sell stock in Georgia. Obviously, they slept walk today. They did not have an amazing day, and Stockton has some limitations where he has some throws that are questionable, decisions that are. I don't think Frazier is as good of a back as I projected him to be preseason, but again, it's only week 2. I think Kirby Smart and Georgia are just fine. Again, with the itch on the nose, I think that's due to heat. Due to heat and humidity and moisture collecting there. Well, we're done with Georgia. That means we're moving on to some greener and brighter pastures. That's where we're moving on to. Best for last, Ohio State 70-0 should be briefly discussed too. Yeah, it will be. We won't spend too much time on that. Especially since against these smaller opponents, Ohio State's always going to score big points. Ohio State's receivers are so good that they can have a bad game and beat someone by 50. Because it's so much harder for a small team to scale up to Ohio State than Georgia, because Ohio State can just chuck it to their athletes. Georgia can't do that. And it also doesn't fit Georgia's identity. Well, Ohio State's identity is, quite frankly, chuck it to your receivers. When they're open, of course, I think Sayan's wonderful. But with Ohio State in particular, and I actually think it's the same way with Tennessee, not quite to the same extreme, but these teams that either have a ton of talent to work with or wonderful offensive schemes, Ohio State has both. I think USC this year is both. I think Tennessee still has that wonderful scheme. You have to a certain degree, disregard the smaller games, and you have to mostly look at some bigger games when they actually have to play defenses or teams that can punch with their defenses. Tennessee racked up tons of points earlier last year and then came down to earth as conference play rolled around. Ohio State didn't quite do that because they were an actual real national title contender and they won it all. USC, they kind of came down to earth, but it was revealed pretty early in the year when they played LSU that they probably were not a special football team. But let's talk about Penn State here. Penn State beat FIU with an F-tier game. We just talked about how Georgia beat Austin Peay with, I think, a C-tier game. I think Penn State beat FIU with an F-tier game. They won 34-0 in the most lethargic fashion possible. Only up 10-0 at the half, 13-0 for parts of the third quarter, then 20-0, then they scored 14 points in the fourth. It was the most lethargic way to win a game 34-0. And they shut FIU out, and they scored 34 points. And the defense looked phenomenal, even though they were rotating from the beginning of the game. Offense looked very concerning, though. I won't lie in that part. They didn't rotate as much as the defense, and they were clearly the inferior side of the ball. I will say, to be fair, though, much like Georgia, I think Penn State's playing with their food. They're running a pretty basic playbook. Penn State, for much of this game, was exclusively kind of limiting their receivers and their passing offense to 10 yards or fewer than that down the field. And you saw that where third quarter, they finally do play action and they're intentionally going deep here, and it's the route they're looking for. Pass, boom, score. I think they're hiding some things. That doesn't mean everything's sunshine and rainbows. That doesn't mean this wasn't a horrible game. It was. To have that much talent and to only go up 10-0 is pretty bad. But I think that this Penn State team's good enough based on preseason research that it's more like Michigan playing Bowling Green in 2023, Ohio State playing Nebraska last year, or how they looked in the first half against Akron, or how Georgia looked in 2022 against Kent State. Where, yeah, bad performance, but that shouldn't take away from how ridiculously good of a team you are. People shouldn't be selling you based on that. Aller's clearly off. Clearly. I know the plays are dumbed down. I know that the full playbook isn't there, but he's making some throws that are just, come on, like don't do that. He's making some throws that I really don't like. Missing guys a little bit, sometimes aiming it, throwing it just a little bit too far, a little bit too behind. I thought that his performance this week was once again underwhelming. Did have some good throws, had over 200 passing yards. He threw it 33 times. They are throwing it at a higher rate than they did last year. Like, he already has 59 passing attempts in his first two games. Already has 59. Last year, first two games, he had 37. And one of those was West Virginia on the road. So they want to get him involved more. They want chemistry with those receivers. And since they don't have Jeremiah Smith, and they're also not, they can't open the playbook because they want to save that for Oregon. While for Ohio State, they have better receivers, and the playbook is wide open because they played Texas. Well, you're consequentially not going to get the same amount of production as throwing it all across the field as Ohio State is. You don't have their players, nor do you have, at least by choice, the open playbook yet. So Aller has struggled. That is very concerning. If this continues, then that's going to be a problem. But I think that Penn State's front six, front seven, they're deep enough at linebacker to operate out of a 4-3 if they want to. I'm impressed with Dominic DeLuca, Tony Roas, Amari Campbell. They look really good. I think that Penn State's defensive line with Alonzo Ford Jr., with Ty Blanding, Zane Durant, Deniden Sutton, is just a D-line full of freaks. It's a top 2 defensive front in America and might be the best. I would put them and Texas in kind of a category of their own right now. What also it kind of bothered me about Penn State in this game, but also kind of made me chuckle and think it's not a problem. It felt like Penn State never believed FIU can win throughout the entire game. And their fans didn't obviously think so, but the way they were playing, there was no urgency. None. And yet FIU couldn't score a single touchdown. So You could think of that as a concern because you always want to see your team play with fire or play with their hair on fire. But you could also take it as a sign that, this team with an F game earns a shutout and looked really good defensively. And their offensive line, I thought, improved from week 1 to week 2. Still some work in progress, but the rushing attack did look better, did perform better. They ran for 209 yards, 6.7 yards per carry. They did have a 67-yard run, but, you take that away, 142 divided by 30, they ran for almost 5 yards per carry without that long run at the end there. That's better than last week where it was about, low 3, high 2, maybe high 3 before they put in the backups. And when they put in the backups, they actually looked better, which I think tells me that they're just trying to get reps. They're trying to get guys warm. Wouldn't be shocked if against Villanova they come out more with their hair on fire in terms of at least, play. They'll probably still hide the playbook a little bit. The team's extremely deep. I think much like Georgia, they're bored. The concerns I have with Penn State really outside of quarterback are defensive back play. Anthony Belgrave shorter. You can tell that he's a redshirt freshman. He had a pretty bad angle on one of the longer runs FIU had, and there were some plays where Penn State got beat in coverage. I mean, their secondary, I think, is very talented. It should be better than last year's, but really ever since 2022, that secondary, I think, is underperformed relative to the talent they have. They are young there. They have depth, I think, everywhere on defense, but they're young at parts on DB, and I think there were some concerns to be had with how they played based on the film I watched. But overall, this is one of the best teams in America. I love where Penn State is. I would still have them, and I'm going to make a video on this week. I'd actually still have them as my number 1 team in college football. I just think you can't overreact to games through 2 weeks, especially against bad opponents. That's thinking like the general public, being emotional, being biased. Don't do that. Just seriously don't do that. Stay grounded. Wait until conference play. Wait until the Oregon game. You will know who this Penn State team is when they play Oregon, because Oregon's legit and Oregon's coming. So if you're thinking about selling your Penn State stock, wait until the Oregon game. But right now, I would not overreact to these results. And we'll talk about Ohio State playing, grambling, and showing off its passing attack. Ohio State did exactly what I thought they should have done. Now, I'm not a coach, so maybe I'm ignorant in saying that, but with how little Julian Sayin played against Texas in terms of throwing the football, and they really didn't have to or want to rely on him too much in that game, I thought it was a pretty intelligent idea to let him out there and give him the entire playbook and let him work and connect with his receivers, gain a bunch of confidence, and blow out Grambling 70-0. That was a really, I think, impressive plan from Brian Hartline and Ryan Day. Saying an 80.9 QBR, the reason it's probably not in the 90s is I think Grambling is one of the worst teams that any FBS team could play. They're a bad FCS team. So imagine how they go against a top 5 Ohio State team. But he threw for 306 yards, 4 touchdowns, just 1 pick that kind of was a bad pick, but 18 of 19, you can't complain about that. He had a really good game. And Lincoln Keenholz had a good game. He had 71 passing yards and 70 attempts with a 91.5 QBR. This quarterback room is deep. They're gaining chemistry with their receivers. They're only going to get better, I think, as the year goes on, the Ohio State quarterbacks will. I was impressed with the offense and the team as a whole. I have less to take away from this matchup than perhaps any other, for the sole reason that Grambling truly is that bad, and it's almost impossible for inferior teams to scale to Ohio State when they play them. This is part of the reason why Day is so good at beating those bad teams. He's a genius, he's a really good head coach, but when you have Hartline and his receivers, no one can ever match your skill talent. So you have to have a team that is either better coached than you, which is rare, or that has better trench play and it calls the game better on that given day, so they can control the game and kind of keep your receivers from dominating. Grambling doesn't have any of those. They have Mickey Joseph at head coach, who, all respects to him, not FBS head coach material. Their roster is not good. Honestly, this team is probably just as bad as the Northwestern State team that Minnesota played, and Minnesota beat them 66-0 and scored 59 points in the first half. This was a scrimmage, more so than Georgia Austin Peay, more so than Penn State FIU, more so than Oregon Oklahoma State, more so than really any of the games that I've talked about outside of that Minnesota game. This is a scrimmage, honestly. So the takeaways I have, the game reactions, are mostly based on preseason research and that Texas game, tying in with what I know. And I've always believed that Sayin is a good QB. He showed that with his throws. Poised, wonderful touch, great air on the ball. He can layer the balls that he throws. He can, beat the zone, beat man. I mean, it's easy when you have those receivers, but we saw against Texas, he made beautiful throws against a really good defense. So I think that saying, well, it's Grambling, of course he looked good, that's a little bit disingenuous. Like the arm talent is totally there, I think. The tackles are great. That should be expected, though. If you gave up even just a handful of pressures to Grambling, that'd be a massive red flag. Keenan Bailey, love what he's done with the tight ends. You got Kazmarek involved, Thurman involved. Tight end is a strength of this offense. It's a staple of the unit. Bailey deserves his flowers for that. And I think that Bo Jackson could be number 1 running back at the end of the year. This is something that Juck on Bucks has talked about. This is something that I think even I mentioned in the preseason that I expected him to be featured more in the offense as the year goes on. He had 109 rushing yards for 12 yards per carry and a touchdown. Just wonderful. Long run of 51. Ohio State was able to run the ball well. You'd expect them to. It's Grambling. If they didn't, that would be pretty bad. But I mean, Jackson showed an edge to him that I don't think any other running back has. And another thing about the rushing attack, that was a beautiful counter design on that one run by C.J. Donaldson. I think it was his longest run of the day. You know what I'm talking about? They pulled offensive linemen to the left, handed off to Donaldson, and just the entire right side of the field opens up and just boom, easy first down. That was so seamless and beautiful. It could make a grown man cry. Can't really make me cry. I don't cry out of beauty. I just kind of get excited and bouncy. But that was wonderful. I think that Ohio State is who we thought they were. And we'll have to learn more about them as they get into Big Ten play. Ohio probably won't tell us much because, again, yes, they played Rutgers close, but Ohio State should not be close to Rutgers. Ohio State could win by 20. They could win by 42. I probably won't care as long as it doesn't look like they're trying super hard and they only win by 20. Like if they decide to play their F game and rotate a bunch and they just come out lazy against Ohio, I wouldn't be all that concerned unless their defense was really getting eaten up. Honest to goodness. I mean, this is one of the best teams in America. So 70-0, showing off their passing attack, getting Sayin more chemistry and connection. Wonderful game. And Ohio State moves on to take on bigger and better opponents, starting with Ohio. Then they got to play on the road at Washington to open up Big Ten play. Getting very, very close to the end here. Very, very close. Actually, we only have 3 more segments to talk about. That'll probably take up the final hour of the live, so we'll push to 3 hours here. Still got large concurrent viewers. Someone said, "Okay, OSU destroyed an FCS team. Shocking." I'm giving takeaways to different teams that I love to talk about. Just doing it. And yeah, Grambling, Kyle. Grambling's awful. Like, there were people saying that this team is better than last year's team, like Ohio State fans saying that. That's insane. Last year's team, I think, handily beats this team right now. The defense is better, clearly up front. I think last year had, at the beginning of the year, did they have better QB play? Probably not, but end of the year, yeah. Last year's O-line at the start of the year is much better than this year's offensive line. Running back is better. Tight end, not nearly as better. And then I think play calling on both sides of the football is probably better. So I think last year's team clearly beats this year's team. Could be wrong, but like people were overreacting to Ohio State winning by 70. It's like, guys, it's Grambling. The only reason I didn't think they'd win 70-0 is because I thought Day would call off the Dogs at halftime. He didn't, but I thought he would. Like the only reason I thought Ohio State would win like maybe 49-0 or 56-0, or maybe they'd give up a late touchdown or a field goal, and Grambling almost got a field goal to be fair, is because Day doesn't, like, no coach plays their A-plus game against every opponent. They don't. That's unsustainable, usually. So, just saying, man, like, don't overreact to that. Ohio State beat Western Kentucky 63-10 in 2023, and their offense had issues that year. Ohio State in 2021, in 2022, they beat Toledo 77-21, casually hung 77 points. Casually. And that team disappointed in a variety of ways. Excuse me there. In 2021, I mean, they hung 50s and 60s like it was nothing on Maryland and Rutgers. And I think that team, as we saw at the end of the day, had some concerns. Like, Day's teams are always going to be great. They're always going to be near elite. Beating Grambling 70-0 doesn't tell us if they are elite or just near elite. Doesn't tell us the difference. We'll have to figure that out as they play in the Big Ten. Let's now talk about Nebraska. Michigan State, again, is the last segment coming up. We just have Nebraska and USC, then we'll talk about Michigan State and Boston College, then get on out of here. Nebraska crushed Akron 68-0 in a game where Matt Rule wasn't satisfied with the 33-point lead at the half. At least from what I saw in a quick snippet. Maybe I got bamboozled and that wasn't actually his attitude, but based on how he's been, I think, treating things, that checks out. I think that Rule's feeling a bit of the competitive pressure. I think that Rule's excited that he has some things going for him, working for him. Nebraska right now is on they're on a 3-game win streak. They're on a 2-game win streak. First time they won an opening game against a Power 4 opponent in forever this year. There's plenty to be excited about for Nebraska. So I understand why Rule has those high expectations and why Nebraska right now is on top of the world. They're 12th in FPI. 12th. Projected to go 9-3 right now. And if FPI is projecting you to go 9-3 and you actually are in the ranking they say you are in, that probably means you go 10-2. So I'm excited to see what Nebraska can do. I love it for Nebraska that they are good, that they can watch dominant performances, that they can win close games. There is not much to take away from this, though. Akron's one of the worst teams in the FBS. I think Raiola played perfectly. Emmett Johnson's insane. The defense right now for Nebraska leads the nation in passer rating allowed. I think it's a little bit of a fake stat, if I'm being honest. And not saying the secondary isn't good, but Sorsby and Cincinnati are clearly limited, and Akron does not have a passing attack. They got shut out by Wyoming. So I think that stat's a little bit of a fake one, a little bit of a paper tiger. But the backups looked fantastic, and Nebraska had several plays and players that were great. So, I think that looking at Nebraska and what they did, I don't know, found it to be impressive, if I'm being honest. Luke Lindenmeyer, he had a good game, and I think Dylan Raiola was perfect with, the touch pass down the field in that matchup. Johnson has burst. He did fumble off of a jump cut, and Akron also stopped Nebraska on a 4th and goal QB sneak. I do think that the Cornhuskers still have some concerns in the trenches after that matchup, factoring in what I thought in the preseason and the game against Cincinnati. We'll see if those can be fixed, but I do think there are some limitations there. Ultimately, Akron's awful. Nebraska wanted to score as many points as possible. They wanted to score 68, so they did. The special teams unit's good. You know, they're punting well. They're kicking and making their field goals. They have great returns on kickoffs and punts. And I think that Mike Eckler has transformed that unit and the culture there. And Dana Holgerson is an offensive wizard. Again, it's Akron. Akron's a bad team, but to put up 68 points, 66 of them being offensive, for Dylan Raiola to have an 89.4 QBR and average 12 yards per attempt, for him on the season to average a hasn't been updated yet. His passer rating hasn't, but a passer rating that I believe is in like the 170s. For him to have that is pretty good. I like what I see about Nebraska, out of Nebraska so far. 730 total yards. I think they are an improved team for sure from what they were in 2024. We'll see if they're a playoff team, as many have said. We'll see if they win 9 or 10 games, as I predicted and others predicted. But with Michigan looking the way they did against Oklahoma, with Michigan State looking the way they did against Boston College, with, I think, Iowa and Mark Gronowski maybe not being as effective of a duo, a combo, a collaboration as some expected. And with Minnesota and USC still having some limitations, it looks like Nebraska's path to punch well above their weight class, go well above their win total, is certainly there. Certainly there. Okay. Kind of got rushed a little bit there, but I think we can now talk about USC and what they did over Georgia Southern. Well, actually, you know what? There's a little bit of a typo there that really bothers me. So we'll just skip to the end and talk about Michigan State and Boston College. I'll record this on my own time. You guys know what I'm talking about. USC Georgia Southern. That will be in my own time. Especially since we have a live show that I want to do in like 4 hours. So for me to get all these segments out, edit for that live show, and do it is going to be pretty tough. But let's talk about Michigan State Boston College. And for any USC fan who's disappointed we skipped over that, that segment will be up on its own. So don't worry about that. That'll be out tonight. Trust me. Michigan State defeated Boston College in a classic, all-time classic 42-40 overtime victory. Michigan State 42, Boston College 40. I thought Michigan State was going to win this game pretty convincingly. I was wrong on that front, but I was correct in the sense that Michigan State won. Some things to keep in mind here looking at the data. Michigan State's pass defense is not, I repeat, not fixed. Nakai Martinez, their best safety, their best DB being out certainly doesn't help, but I still think that performance to a large degree was inexcusable. I mean, Boston College was getting whatever they wanted through the air, even when they couldn't run the football. It was kind of an indicting, damning performance on MSU's secondary. But Michigan State's defensive front, Michigan State's offensive line in terms of run blocking, their receivers, their QB play, I thought were incredibly admirable in this matchup. They fought hard. They were tough. I loved what I saw out of Michigan State in the trenches, their physicality and physicality of their players, breaking tackles, staying upright, churning forward for extra yards. That is Mekhi Frazier, Nick Marsh, Alante Brown on that kickoff return. Michigan State, I think, is clearly a better team and a, more importantly, tougher team than they were last year. Boston College has some issues. They do. Michigan State does too. I mean, Boston College averaged 0.25 expected points added per play, 86th percentile. They had a 50% success rate. And that's Boston College. Now, Dylan Lonergan was recruited highly out of high school. O'Brien is known for having a knack with QBs, so I'm going to give MSU somewhat benefit of that out and say Lonergan may be one of the better QBs they play all year. But he's not better than Raiola, not better than Aller, Probably not better than Maava, who they're going to be playing kickoff 11 p.m. Eastern time in 2 weeks. There's a lot of other QBs and especially offenses and teams overall that are better than Boston College. So I have concerns for Michigan State in that regard. But here, a win is a win. That's what you needed. You needed that win. You got it. And I think that to a certain degree, you have to be content with that. And as a member of the live chat just pointed out, and that's a really good point that I wrote down here but just didn't get to it yet, Childs doesn't turn over the football as much. He's not as turnover prone. Even though I don't think his pocket awareness has taken leaps and bounds forward from last year, it's better. He doesn't make the same risky throws, and he had a beautiful pass deep to Nick Marsh late in the game that I think really helped keep Michigan State in it and gave him momentum, because Michigan State, I think, is the better team than Boston College. But to win only by 2 at home in overtime and your opponent outgains you by, 77 yards is not a good sign, especially when they're one-dimensional and they still are passing on you and moving the ball. Like Boston College had 390 passing yards for 4 touchdowns. Michigan State had 231 for 4, to be fair. Like they were passing the ball really good and certainly running the ball better than Boston College. But just some concerning things that I saw out of MSU and BC there, but mostly MSU, given I thought they're gonna win pretty handily. I was wrong. Boston College, Michigan State about split TOP. BC had 70 plays, MSU had 64. The real difference here was Michigan State had 5.7 yards per carry. BC had 2.7. So I think what helped MSU at the end there with the 2-point conversion is at some point in the game, it becomes obvious that Boston College can really only pass the football. So it becomes obvious what to defend. MSU was good enough at both running and passing where Boston College's defense was on its heels a little bit more. And, that rollout, the fake rollout where Childs rolls to the opposite side of where he wants to find his receiver, passes it, Marsh gets separation, 2-point conversion's good, it's a win. Very exciting game. I thought it was the best game of the weekend, honestly, in terms of excitement, with Florida USF being close. But that was much uglier. Iowa State, I also would say, is pretty close, but again, uglier. And Michigan State wins. Adjusting for sacks, they ran for 5.7 yards per carry. Boston College didn't get any sacks, so their 2.7 yards per carry is what their rushing offense is. It's a bad rushing offense. They weren't good against the FCS, even worse against the stout MSU front. Michigan State has proven, I think, that they have a good rushing offense through 2 weeks. It's a better rushing offense than I thought they would have. They do have inferior pass protection compared to what I expected, though. Their tackles have kind of disappointed me a bit in pass pro, but they have impressed me in run blocking, that's for sure. Some other things to keep in mind here. Neither team could really stuff their opponent's run, but Michigan State did a good job limiting it to maybe 1 or 2 yards. Boston College couldn't tackle as well as Michigan State did. They just didn't. Michigan State ran the more explosive operation, and I think at the end of the day, I mean, maybe I'm wrong here. It felt like Michigan State was the better team and that they have the better defense and slightly better offense, but that Boston College had a huge matchup edge. Part of it was thought to be potentially their power rushing with some of the NFL players they have in the O-line and how they've traditionally ran the ball with Castellanos. But at the end of the day, their massive matchup advantage was their receivers, Lewis Bond, quarterback Dylan Lonergan, and also got to shout out some other receivers that they have, Jeremiah Franklin. They used Turbo Richard at the backfield fairly often at running back. Those players against Michigan State's DBs, that was an absolute nightmare. I mean, the epitome of Michigan State's defense struggling against Boston College was Jordan Hall being, lined up against a Boston College receiver and Joshua Eaton being annihilated and totally missing a open field tackle against Turbo Richard for, I think, Boston College's first or second touchdown. Michigan State didn't take good angles. They were not covering their receivers well, had some missed assignments. It just wasn't a good game from the Spartan defense. So Joe Rossi really has a lot to go back to on the drawing board and a lot of different things to fix. But it's a good win for Michigan State. And a huge takeaway I would have for both of these teams, because they're in similar situations. I think Michigan State's better, but Michigan State has probably a larger weakness than Boston College does. Their secondary. We'll see what happens when Martinez comes back, and I think they may have some other injuries too. And their schedule's tougher. So will either of these teams go bowling, or can they dish out any upsets? That's a really good question, I think, that people should be considering. That these teams, with what they showed, week 1, week 2, looking at preseason research, knowing that I think both Bill O'Brien and Jonathan Smith are good coaches, well, what can they do? Like, they're probably gonna need an upset or two to go bowling, or to certainly go better than that. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting. I mean, Michigan State plays Youngstown State, but then they have to travel to USC. 11 p.m. kickoff, and USC right now is being viewed very highly in the power ratings. After their bye, they have to travel to Nebraska, host UCLA, travel to Indiana, host Michigan, play at Minnesota. Off their November 8th bye, they got to play Penn State at home, Iowa on the road, and Maryland neutral field. For Boston College, meanwhile, they got to play at Stanford this Saturday. They have a bye September 20th, but they have to host Cal, play at Pitt, host Clemson, host UConn, who nearly beat Syracuse, play at Louisville, host Notre Dame, host SMU, host Georgia Tech. It's a lot of games in a row. Michigan State's byes are better placed. They get a bye November 22nd before playing at Syracuse November 29th. What upsets can they pull off? Will they go bowling? I would be inclined after this performance to say that both are around 6-6. These are 6-6 caliber teams. But Michigan State's defense is in trouble. It is. I mean, we've already talked about this. They could not stop Boston College's passing attack, even when they knew it was coming. And Boston College can't run the football. Now, I think Michigan State's defensive front's good. Like, I don't think anyone on their schedule, minus maybe USC, Penn State, and maybe Iowa as injuries set in, are going to be able to run on them. I think a lot of teams will have problems running on Michigan State. Even if they're able to pass successfully on them. I truly think Michigan State's linebackers in front are kind of that good. Elite? No, absolutely not. But good, maybe great, yeah. However, objectively looking at their FCS performance and the fact that Boston College could do whatever they wanted through the air, and even then the rushing attack wasn't open, that's cause for concern. Like, Clemson's defense is better than Michigan State's. Notre Dame's is. Louisville's is probably more balanced and therefore will be harder for Boston College to take advantage of. And Boston College, look, they're not deep. So the more games you play, more injuries you incur, the worse you get, similar with Michigan State. So I'm curious to see how these teams do, and I'll be following each fairly closely, especially the Spartans, but Boston College too. I'll be following them throughout the year. Michigan State is a run game. I think Childs is gritty. A question I have that I want an answer for in these next few weeks is whether or not Dylan Lonergan is great. Against Syracuse, I'd expect him to perform well. I meant to say Stanford, but Syracuse I would too. Syracuse looks pretty bad. I would expect it against Stanford. I'd expect it against Cal. I can't say I really objectively expect it against other teams, but we'll see. I think Childs is more proven to this point than Lonergan, but Lonergan really impressed me. I mean, he had some really good throws. Also had open receivers all night, but he had some impressive throws and he kept his poise. So we'll see what happens, and maybe Boston College's pass protection is that good. I know Rossi's defense traditionally struggles getting sacks. Michigan State doesn't have elite pass rushers, but who knows? It's a little too early to make definitive conclusions for either of these teams. I would just say, based on preseason research and maybe recalibrating a bit from what I've seen, I think both of these are teams that'll finish 5-7, 6-6, 7-5. I think Michigan State has a higher ceiling. I think they are a better team with more potential. I will say, though, with that secondary and with the schedule they have, Boston College may have a higher floor. But with Michigan State having that head-to-head win, it's going to be easier at this point, I think, for Boston College to finish 4-8, 5-7 than it will be for Michigan State, even with the Spartans having the tougher schedule. Overall, it's a good game. I think Bill O'Brien and Jonathan Smith are both good coaches in their own right. I have a lot of respect for them. Up next, Boston College plays at Stanford this weekend. Michigan State gets more of a tuned-down game before their trip to USC in Week 4 by playing Youngstown State at home this Saturday. And thank you so much for watching, everyone. Again, we'll get that USC segment out before tonight. And tonight, we will be doing previews. And the segments for those, in case you're not going to stay up to start watching me at 10 and finish with me at 11:30, the preview segments will be released tomorrow morning. And then tomorrow afternoon and night, we may have other content. Maybe. Not promising anything. But thank you so much for watching. If we don't have any super chats to get to or no new members, we'll exit out here and we'll have a great rest of our day. These segments will be cut up and released out to you. Bob Springer, not South Carolina. When I see SC, I think South Carolina. USC, I think USC for whatever reason. As a USC fan, I hate it. I thought we would get away from all this 7-8 crap once we joined the Big Ten. Michigan State's getting shafted with that game next week. I do agree with that. And what sucks is because USC isn't yet an elite team, and I think they will be in a few years, but since they're not yet an elite team, with how LA is, a game that late in LA will not draw viewership for USC. Like, USC fans will probably be doing other things. I bet you that stadium will be partially empty. So you really screw over both teams. Like, I don't think, unless Michigan State looks awesome against Youngstown State and USC destroys Purdue, and there's a possibility for both those things, I don't think you are going to... I don't think you're going to see that stadium full at 11 p.m. Eastern time, or 8 p.m. Pacific time. I don't. Someone says MSU's defensive issues are overblown. It was a top 35 roster in NCAA last year, and this roster is better. I do agree, but Lonergan is an unknown. So what happens if against Stanford he looks pretty bad? Don't think that'll happen because he did look good in week 1, but I do think that if Boston College did that to you, what will USC, Penn State, and Nebraska... I even forgot Michigan State plays Indiana. Like, there are 4 or 5 schools who are definitively better than Boston College through the air, not even factoring their overall offense. But I agree with you, Echo. The pass rush, I think, is worse than the secondary. The secondary was missing their best player. The pass rush had all their players healthy and couldn't get home. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So the reaction to USC Georgia Southern will just be like 5-6 minutes. I'll record that on my own time shortly after this. Segment should be up probably starting at 7. I'll get some segments and release some of those out. We'll be live at 10:30. We may even go really late and start at 11 tonight. If we start at 11, though, I'll only go for an hour and probably just do 3 or 4 previews. I'd love to do 5, maybe even 6. But again, everyone, make sure to subscribe, make sure to like, hit that notification bell. I'll see you guys very soon. Tune in again tonight. Live's already scheduled. I'll move up the time because I'm not going to be able to go at 9:30. I got to watch some film before making my previews. But we'll see you later tonight sometime. Hit the notification bell so that you get notified when I go live. Yeah. Thank you guys for watching.